You are listening to the Gritty Podcast, where we talk about all things gritty. Life is not easy. It never was, and it never will be. A good life takes grit. Prioritize who you are and who you want to be, because life isn't fair, and a little grit can make all the difference. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. I am your host, Brian Call, and I am joined by my brother, the Gritty Broman. How's it going, Brent?
It's going well.
Brent just finished editing the show we recorded yesterday with Jack Carr, author and former Navy SEAL and author. It's interesting. It's a great conversation, and I think that everyone should listen to it. Mm-hmm. You know, not every episode is for every person that we record. Sometimes the subject just doesn't interest you, and it might seem on the front of it like an author of a fictional book might not be maybe your thing, but the dude's super cool.
He's a badass. He's a badass gone badass author.
And it was a really fun conversation. I'm an avid reader, as people know. I love books, and I've read a fair share. And I'm not a fictional book snob or non-fictional snob. I like all books, literally, from fantasy and sci-fi to, thriller and action, a mystery, you name it. I just like a good book. Mm-hmm. It's like when someone says, "Do you like a beautiful woman?" Like, I like all women.
What's your type,
shapes,
What's
sizes.
Your type? When people ask me what my type is, I tell them my type is women.
Yeah, like my type is beautiful. I guess. It's so funny because I can remember being in Japan. I was a missionary in Japan for 2 years, and I remember we would go to the public bathhouses, because our apartment didn't even have a place to bathe. So it's pretty common.
Third world country.
Yeah, well, we would just go down to this local, look like a swimming pool, right? But it was just showers and
yeah.
You pull in there, and all the Japanese men would be like, "Oh, you like Japanese girl? You like Japanese girl?" I mean, it was like they just wanted to know what Americans thought of Japanese girls, and I'm like, they're pretty girl's a pretty girl. Yeah. I don't care if she's Japanese, Chinese, black, white, native. It doesn't matter. And I feel that way about books. I feel that way about music. Mm-hmm. I don't know. There's music I like, from AC/DC to, the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. Like,
I draw the line at Motab. Motab.
So,
I don't know.
So we, my point is, I like it all, but one of my favorite genres for sure, especially, I guess, the latter 20 years of my life, has been that thriller kind of category, especially if it's CIA, military, conspiracy, government cover-up kind of thriller. Mm-hmm. That's especially cool. Especially gets me in nowadays. So maybe it just means I'm mature now.
Old is the word you're looking for.
I know you. I could see the look on your face. You want to throw that insult out. And so we sit down with Jack, and you hear, Jack was on a podcast with Jocko. It's episode 183, where they talk about Jack's background, like his experience as a Navy SEAL, serving in the military, and kind of he and Jocko kind of go back and forth on their.
They go through his whole military career from before until he got
all the
out.
way up to where he writes a book, even before
childhood stuff.
Yeah, childhood stuff. So
influential
if
years.
If you want to dive into that, go ahead. But it's already there. It's episode 183 with Jocko.
We didn't really dive into that.
We didn't get into that because selfishly I wanted to ask Jack a ton of other questions that are that just, man, you get an author in front of you of a book you've read that you really like.
A bestseller.
Yeah.
Like, the dude is killing it. Like, he did something right.
Yeah, it's a very awesome book, by the way, and couldn't be happier. And he's a avid hunter, and so supporting a hunter is always awesome. But you just want to be entertained. You're sitting in a tree stand. I like the audio versions of books just because I feel busy. I like to sit down with one and read one, but it just depends on
what's
where
going
I'm at in life. But it's an excellent book, and in this podcast we kind of cover what is Jack's creative process. I'm always interested in telling a story, a good story, and how that's done. So picking his brain on how he does that, what makes a good story, what makes something interesting and compelling. You know, as we make our own videos and our own voiceover, let's say, or we're trying to do a post on social or something, there's the importance of being able to tell a story is vital to today's world. You know, I think it's always been that way, but it's especially now very important. And then there were a lot of other questions too, but it's just a great conversation. So
there's 3 or 4 pretty lengthy segments where he goes into just his creative process, how he goes about writing the book, the steps, how he edits. He answered a question for me: how do you kill your babies? You know, you spend all this time trying to make this really amazing thing. You really love it, but in the overall picture, it needs to go. It doesn't fit there. It doesn't belong there. Yeah. And that's a struggle for me. And I'm kind of in the process of, I don't know what my creative process is right now. And that's a real struggle for me.
Right.
I'm trying to be creative. I'm trying to figure out how I go about and how do I express my creativity the best way. And it was really great for me to sit down and just hear him talk about it for a little bit.
Yep. And he's an excellent human. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Before we dive in, I just want to ask you to sign up for the newsletter. Go to briancall.com and sign up for the newsletter. We're going to start doing giveaways for everyone who has signed up for the newsletter. So if we need to bribe you.
Only through the newsletter.
Only through the newsletter. And the reason is just because when we try to reach out and tell you, hey, we just did a cool new video, which we have the tar footage coming out in a 4-part series here in about a week or 2. We have the first couple done, but we're just trying to finish the next 2 and let you guys all binge watch them kind of at the same time. We could release them right now, but we're going to try that kind of all at once process. And
well, the problem is that it seems to get lost in the shuffle on YouTube.
For us, I think we're not as active on YouTube as some others are. You know, when we have content, we put it out. When we don't, we don't. And YouTube does reward through its algorithm those who continue to post like on a consistent basis. But
quantity over quality.
Perhaps. I mean, there's some production houses, I think they can keep their quantity up and their quality up, but yeah, for us. So if you sign up for the newsletter, we don't bombard you. In fact, we're horrible at sending messages out. So it's not like you're going to get a ton of emails from us, but if you sign up, we're going to let you know what's going on. And that's probably the best way for us to get in contact with you and kind of keep you in the loop with Gritty if you're interested, because we'll let you know what podcasts we publish that week. We'll let you know what shows are out, what videos we're doing, which ones have moved from the theater where we were just showing them into digital space, stuff like that. And on Instagram, Facebook, and social, it's just not that easy. You know, the algorithms restrict our reach unless you pay for ads, and it's just not. And it seems like we're being censored more than ever. And it's just the nature of, I guess, being maybe a conservative voice or a pro-hunting voice in an environment where people are, the wider public, or at least those that are managing Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, even YouTube, Google, they just have this tendency to demonetize and derank your stuff. So sign up for the newsletter and then we can hit you up directly.
And while you're signing up for the newsletter, folks, scroll up to the top and head to the shop. Buy a sweet hat and shirt.
Yeah, we would appreciate that. We only have 2 shirt styles and 3 hats to choose from. They're all the same. One day at a time here at Gritty. I'm not the best salesman, so but if you want to support the show, we appreciate you getting a hat and shirt, and that's always cool. We sold a ton, so that's really cool to see.
That's not one of our shirts, but I really like the shirt you're wearing right now.
This is a Mountain Up shirt.
I was looking at that and I was like, dang, I really like that.
I need a few more that are cool like this, and we're working on it one day at a time. I got Brent here, so he's now our new film editor. Brent's put together the 4th video of the Bear series. So we have a 3-part series that we just got up from this year's bear season with Lampers and Lusk and myself, where we shot 5 bears in 5 days. And we walk you through the hunt, and we walk you through the gear we used, and we walk you through stuff about bears, information on the videos, and they're entertaining. They're cool. They got a lot of reviews, a lot of views.
A lot of information.
And then, but there was a 4th part. We kind of left you hanging because on that last bit of the series, what happens?
A lot of hiking.
a lot of hiking, 2 days of backpacking. And so there's no action.
But there's a lot of cool stuff. I mean, hide care, meat care.
Yeah.
And the country
Informative.
is beautiful.
Yeah. It's informative.
You guys come across a wallow?
A bear wallow.
A bear wallow, which
like,
I didn't even know that existed.
Oh, it was all bear sign. You know, these bears were just, they're crowded in there, as you could see from the third video where we killed 3 bears.
5 slobs.
We killed,
all in like
but
one.
we killed 3 bears in 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it just like, boom. They were just really concentrated in that. And the bear sign was wild. And we do come across like a wallow section that's just hammered by bears. Not elk, not deer, but actually bears.
I didn't know bears wallowed.
Oh, yeah, especially when it's really hot. And it was pretty warm. There's bear pads and bear tracks. And they do what they call stomp walking. Bear stomp walk, where they...
This blew my mind.
It's weird. You go through and you see these prints in the ground where a bear has walked, and they're distinct. And you're like, why would a bear, when it's walking a trail, walk in the exact same footsteps that it has walked before? Like, deer and elk don't do that. They just walk down a trail. We just walk down a trail. But with bears, there's actually a footpad here and a footpad here and a footpad here that has been there for
their whole life.
Eons, 100 years, I don't know. But that trail, those trails, you see them on Kodiak too, where bears will cross a valley bottom and go up to another mountain range. And when they do that, they step in the same holes. And some of those holes are inches and inches, like 6 inches deep, a foot deep, because they've been stepping in the same freaking holes for ever. That's just what those bears do. And it turns out it's a territorial thing. It's a marking behavior is the theory. And different people call it different things. But the fascinating thing about bears is, a bear trail, a well-worn bear trail, because bears will step in the exact same footholds as they walk that trail.
That's weird.
So it'll have all this grass and stuff going.
And it's for marking territory?
Yeah, the theory is that when they press really hard in those steps to mark their
It's not
territory.
like some weird OCD, don't step on a crack and break your mother's back kind of a thing?
I don't know. What I read is, in all the research, there's not a ton that I could find on it. Maybe a bear expert can chime in. But what I've read is it's a territorial thing. It's a territorial thing where they mark their territory. And where Lusk shoots that bear, it's on the video, his bear with the white V patch. It's up there rubbing its back on the tree.
I know you guys named him Gorilla, but you should have named him Baloo.
That would cause too many people to have an emotional reaction.
No, and then the next one should have been named Bambi, and the next one should have been named Thumper.
Yes.
And the last one should have been named Flower.
That would go over so well.
Winnie.
Anyway, he scratches his back on the tree, standing up, and I guess that's a common way that bears mark territory, is their back up on the tree. They also bite trees, bite things, branches to mark where they've been. And I don't know if that's like a way to see my mouth is bigger than yours or what it is, but I've
heard that's with dogs when they pee. The higher up they can pee, because all urine supposedly smells the same, so they're trying to shoot as high as they can.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's a thing or not.
Yeah, so very, very interesting.
But it's great. People go watch it.
Yeah, it's a cool video. So the 4th one was going to go out tomorrow is the plan. Oh. So if we can get it out tomorrow evening, kind of something like that.
If you see the timestamp, this is 11:45. Hey, it's still out tomorrow.
It's Brent.
Whatever.
Brent, slow to get his work done. Anyway, enjoy the podcast and go follow Jack if you liked it, if you're into it, and get that book. I'm telling you, it's a good read. Get it on Audible if you just have a long car drive ahead of you. I know you guys are going out hunting soon, and you got 10-hour drives and so on. So
tree stands
and ground blinds and that kind of bit. Get the audio version.
And follow Jack. It's at Jack Carr USA.
Yeah, and Carr is with 2 R's. Yep. So you'll find more out when you listen to this show. Hope you enjoy it. Let us know. And as always, friends, stay gritty. Let's roll.
Awesome.
Ready?
Let's do it.
All right, folks. Welcome to the Gritty Podcast. Today, I got my guest here, Jack Carr, author of True Believer, which is your newest book, which I got an early copy of.
Yes, you did.
Because it comes out in 2 days?
Comes out, Tuesday, 2 days. Yeah.
How stoked are you about that?
Crazy. I mean, the first one, same thing. I mean, I feel the same way about the second one as I did the first one. Just so fortunate to be in this position. And it's crazy.
So Terminal List was the first book you wrote.
Yep.
And I think it has something like 10,000 reviews on Audible. Really close.
I haven't even looked.
And they're like
I don't even know.
5 stars.
There's some good
there's you know how it's like 4 9/10 of a star.
Yeah, it's feel pretty lucky. There's I haven't seen the Audible ones because I just don't have time to be just kind of consumed by that part of it. But I will glance at the Amazon ones because it's so easy just to go down to a lot of the regular hardback.
That's a cutthroat crowd.
Is it tough?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I think so.
I think Ray Porter does an excellent job.
He's awesome, and he's a great dude in real life too.
Really, I was going to ask you about that.
So awesome. Yeah, we met up at the Audio Awards this year, and to see it up there nominated next to like Stephen King and Ruth Ware and all these people, like it was crazy. But yeah, we got to meet up for the first time and have a couple drinks, and he's just a super guy.
And so he's for people who don't know, Ray Porter is the narrator of the audio version of the book.
Yep.
And so Terminal List, the first time I heard about you was actually on that British Columbia
nice
moose hunt. I actually, John Barklow had told me a little bit about you before that.
Yeah, one of my favorite people.
We were John Barklow from Sitka. I think we were in deer camp with Sloan, maybe in Texas, but he shows up and in BC, and he's got Terminal List.
Oh, nice.
And it's paperback.
Nice, John.
And he is reading the hell out of it. And he's like, oh, yeah. And so, of course, I'm curious, and so he tells me more about you. And I had just kind of heard a little bit, but now I saw the book, talking to him, and he couldn't put it down. And then I was asking John, well, what books do you normally like? And trying to assess his credibility
as
a
he's pretty credible across the board though.
Judge's taste.
I got it.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. What else do you like?
Yeah. If you have good taste.
Understood. Yeah. Right. Right. If he said something off the wall, you can kind of
discard that guy's opinion. Yeah, I liked what John was putting down when he described his other books he's read, and we got into that, and then I was going to read it while I was there. But John used it for fire.
So as he should. That's awesome. Love it.
Just ripped a whole section out and was using well, dang it.
I thought you were going to say his toilet paper for a second.
No.
I'm glad it was fire.
He built the fire with it. I was like, wow. Okay, well, I'll read it later. No,
he's so great. And this third one that I'm working on right now, I'm picking his brain a little bit because it goes into a lot of survival stuff and hunting in Kamchatka and in Siberia. So I get to pick John's brain a little bit because he spent so much time just working in those environments up in Kodiak at our cold weather warfare training facility, and such a great guy.
Well, for those that are listening, one of the I've right at the beginning, right at the outset of Terminal List.
Yeah.
You've got your character, like the Wyoming hunting zone he's in. He's decked out in Sitka gear. I'm listening to it and I'm like, this guy's a hunter, and this guy knows about hunting, or he's done his research on it, and it felt so real and honest. Getting right into the story, and then you listen to the guy go through the woods, and he's trying to blend in and all that. And he could have put on like the military style stuff and snuck around, but like you said, he's more incognito in Sitka gear.
That's it. In that part of the story, he needs to take somebody out and needs to make it look like an accident, make it look like a hunting accident in this case, so he can finish going through the names on his list and put those people in the ground one by one. And for most of them, he uses the tactics and techniques that worked against us in Iraq and Afghanistan, and he uses them on home soil. So he essentially becomes the terrorist or insurgent that he'd been fighting for the last, in that book, 16 years at war. He essentially abandons everything he's fought for and lived for his entire life to go and put these people in the ground that are part of a bigger conspiracy that helped kill his family and his troop.
It was, I'm loving it so far. And then I listened to your show with Jocko, and so I learned from that a lot about your background. And you and him talked because you have, you cross paths because you were a former Navy SEAL.
Yep.
And so I soaked all that in. And for people that are listening who want to learn more about that, they can go to Jocko's podcast.
Yeah, he took the whole, my whole time in the military. He just started at the beginning and we went to the end.
It went to the end. Yeah. And it's great. So people can really understand your background. But suffice it to say, you've got a vast experience serving the country, and you know about the things you're covering in the book. And so it's interesting because I was reading some reviews by critics.
Right. And
they're like, here we have a guy. They compared you to a shooting star, by the way. Like you're that rare, like the book this good coming along. And it is kind of fascinating because what did you write before this?
Yeah, I grew up reading. So my mom was a librarian, and I grew up surrounded by books. So I had this love of reading at a very early age. And then my grandfather was killed in World War II. So I grew up with pictures of him and his squadron and the silk maps they gave aviators back then. Because if you had paper maps and you hit the water, it would disintegrate. So you still had these silk maps that you could still use when they're wet. His medals, his wings, and there was a show on TV called Black Sheep Squadron at the time. So Robert Conrad, I think I got a lot of my leadership style from Robert Conrad. Actually, a lot of drinking and fighting, which was it's a very impressionable time in my life seeing that stuff. So I always knew I was going in the military,
right?
And then I found out what SEALs were, and was like, that's it. There's something about that was just so primal about just ground-based warfare. Like you can't get any more primal really than that. I mean, the closest thing, hunting and that, and there are so many similarities between the two. The same weapons that you're using for both, the same types of people that have been procuring food for the tribe back from the beginning of time are the same ones defending it. So a lot of things that cross over there. But I always knew I was going to go into the military. And back in the 80s, you couldn't just jump online and Google Navy SEAL. Now you have an endless supply of information to do that.
Yeah.
But back then, there was the library. Yeah, there was nothing. There were a couple books here and there, but not many.
You used the Dewey Decimal System I did.
Exactly. My mom wanted to teach us how to use that. So any opportunity she got to teach us how to use the Dewey Decimal System, we were on it. We were at the library and we were researching. So there's just a couple sentences back then. But point being, a lot of the information I got came from the pages of fictional thrillers at the time by guys like David Morrell, Nelson DeMille, A.J. Quinnell, Tom Clancy, J.C. Pollock, all these guys who had protagonists that typically had some sort of special operations experience in Vietnam. And so I learned a lot from that. And I thought, you know what? One day after my time in the military, that has to come first just because you got to do it when you're young. Then I'm going to write just like these guys, just like the books I'm enjoying right now in my youth. I'm going to write just like that. And those are the two things I wanted to do.
Yeah, and in this review, the gentleman said, here he is, this guy coming out of nowhere, kind of left field. Yeah. He not only is a former Navy SEAL, and so he actually has experience and knowledge and can write a novel in this genre because of the experience, but he can actually also write. Yeah. Because you'll have both. You'll have a guy who can write but never did the actual action. Right. And you'll have a guy who did the action who thinks he's going to be a new writer but can't really write. Right. And so here you are marrying the two up. Yep. It is a unique thing.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit in that my early professors in storytelling were those people that I just mentioned, those authors I read during the 80s. And then, of course, in the 90s, I kept reading and discovered Stephen Hunter. And then after I joined the military, Vince Flynn and Daniel Silva and Brad Thor. But those guys were really the foundation of that gave me the background to be able to write because of reading. Because I'm a fan first. I'm a reader. Right. And I love it.
Well, that's my question is, I want to get into, for a little bit here at least, part of this discussion is, I'm fascinated by writing. In college, I did really well in writing. In high school, I was in all the advanced writing courses, and I crushed writing. And I did it a lot. And then when I went into business, I would write all the reports for, audits and so forth. And my writing became very, should we say, succinct and business oriented for a while. But that's a skill in itself. And you use as few words as possible to communicate the idea as clearly as possible. Yep. I did that, but it's been probably 4 or 5 years really since I really quit that career path and started podcasting, where it's more verbal communication and video is kind of what I've done a lot more of. I haven't written much in quite a long time, really. And the only time I really write is when I get pissed off because somebody posted something to Instagram.
Someone left a nasty comment.
Write a angry response and then delete it.
Yeah. And I'll write like or something I get really passionate about, or some politician comes out on public lands or something, and I just get fired up, and then I'll go into some writing frenzy.
Nice.
But I'm fascinated by the creative process and how you have been able to do what you've done.
Got it.
And, because like, how do you, just because you want to be an author doesn't make you one. Like, how did you learn to write? How have you accomplished this?
Got it. Well, I'll say that I didn't spend a lot of time studying how to do it. I did a little bit, just because I'm always interested in whatever I'm going to do, whether it's hunting or writing or whatever it might be. But I think you can almost do that too much. There's a point where you just have to sit down and do it. So of course we had Stephen King's On Writing, a great one. David Morrell's The Successful Novelist, another great one. Then Stephen Pressfield, who wrote Gates of Fire, Legend of Bagger Vance, and tons of other things. He has a series on creativity. One's called The War of Art. Another one's called Turning Pro. Another one's called Do the Work, The Authentic Swing. They all pretty much say similar things.
I'll listen to the podcast. I think it's Writing Excuses with Brandon Sanderson.
Oh, really? I don't know it.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Nice. I'll have to check that out.
Brandon's done The Wheel of Time, some of the more, he took over for
Robert Jordan
after he died and did Wheel of Time. And then after that, he's done books like
their fantasy series.
Got it.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever read much fantasy. I read The Hobbit, which was amazing. And then I started Lord of the Rings, and this was, 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't get past the elfin, the language. I love The Hobbit, but I couldn't get it.
He likes to explain the color of each flower petal.
Yeah,
that's my problem.
I feel bad that I haven't read those, but I don't.
Yeah. I've read every Vince Flynn novel.
Nice.
And I've read almost all of Nelson DeMille's.
Yep.
I think Nelson DeMille is king of like witty banter,
So great.
Just so good at. I'm laughing most of the time.
Yeah,
because of his sense of humor, the dryness and stuff.
Yeah, no, he's great, and I hope to meet him in person one day soon. But like the Charm School, I remember I read that in probably 7th grade, maybe 7th, 8th grade, somewhere in there. And I'm hesitant to go back and read some of these things that I loved reading growing up because I don't want them to lose the magic that they had.
Right.
Do they
like
hold
the summer
up?
of '87, that I don't want to read it back with all the lenses and all the filters that I built up throughout my life between now and then because they were such special novels.
Nostalgia is the best filter you can put on anything.
Well, it's funny.
It's movies too.
It was funny because I mentioned to my brother here that, when I listen to when someone tells me what their favorite books are or some books that they like, I'll think back. I'll ask them when they read it.
Right.
Because I will say this, that there's certain authors now that when I go back and read it, at the time I was like, this is awesome. And now I read it and I'm like, it was pretty okay.
Yes, I don't want that to happen. I'm so hesitant to go back and read some of these things I have such great memories of.
Yeah.
And
then some just they don't disappoint. They're just they're just genius.
Yeah,
they're genius.
I mean, I have read a few, but they're more recent ones. So I've read Term Limits a few times. Point of Impact by Stephen Hunter, which came out in the early '90s. I've read that. I'm a huge Stephen Hunter fan. But yes, I've read a couple. So I've read a couple more than once.
I was telling Brent earlier. I read that because someone asked you what books interested you. And for some reason, Stephen Hunter I read Point of Impact, and it just didn't get me.
Oh, really? He's a very unique style of writing, and
yes.
I think he's a genius. I think he's a great guy in real life. So we're planning to get on the range together here fairly soon.
I'll have to go and check that out again.
Yeah, I know it's definitely different than other things out there. You can definitely, if you didn't have the author's name on as part of an article or as on the cover of the book, you could tell it was him for sure. If you're familiar with his stuff, because he's such a unique style.
Vince Flynn. Out of Vince Flynn books, what's one of your favorites?
Term Limits, even though it's the one without Mitch Rapp, it's the first one.
Yeah.
And it's the one that kind of, I think he published it himself, and then he was discovered by Emily Bessler Books, part of Simon & Schuster, who's my publisher now. And then, off to the races after they kind of got it out there. And I think kind of changed the genre, even though it was written before September 11th. Yeah. It was written at a time where we were heading that way, if you were reading the winds. And,
it was no longer the the Cold War and and Russian spies.
Even though it's a novel of revenge, essentially.
It was shifting though into like terrorism and things like that.
Exactly. The people that were the protagonists there had a background in the counterterrorism arena, and it had a different feel to it than novels up to that point.
Yeah.
And even though his next novels started with the Transfer of Power with Mitch Rapp, and then went on to the Third Option, and then off to with the Mitch Rapp series, for whatever reason, I think it's probably because I read it first, maybe, that it's one of my favorites. Absolutely love it. And then of the other ones with Mitch Rapp, the Third Option, which was most people, I don't know if that's their favorite or not, but it's maybe it's because of where and when I read it again. Who knows? Yeah. But I have great memories of reading that, and just I've read them all as well. And he's a master. I got to meet him once at SHOT Show before he passed away, and we met right at the end, right as things were shutting down. And as you know from that, it takes a while to weave your way out of that place if you're lost in the maze of SHOT Show in Vegas. And so we got to hang out together for a little bit as we worked our way out, and I just always treasure that time that I had with him. He's just an amazing guy.
I really enjoyed Consent to Kill.
Nice. That's a great one. Such a great one.
And
I love the ending. It's a great one.
That was the part, right? Yeah. Like I kind of thought I knew the ending the whole time.
Yeah.
Right. And then when we agree that Louis Philippe Gould is like the perfect.
That is the perfect villain name.
Yeah, it's a good name. It's a good name for sure.
You know, he
because it sounds French.
Yeah,
you can't trust a Frenchman.
And I don't know. It was written so well because when he got to that point, and you had a tie to, let's say, Claudia, you had this whole feeling of you wanted revenge because you're so bitter.
Yeah,
but at the same time, you just didn't want to see Gould get killed.
Yeah, it's great.
And you're just like, that's just such a twisted set of emotions to feel all at the same time.
Yeah.
And then
you want to know what's happening next. You want to buy the next book.
Yeah,
which is the key right there. You want to finish one and wanting to get that next one.
So, I mean, tell me, what makes a good story?
Yeah, well, I was introduced to Joseph Campbell like 1988, not in person, but just to his work. And he studied mythologies across culture. And there was a series on PBS called The Power of Myth. And there's now a book, I think that a subsequent book by the same name that came out based on those interviews with Bill Moyers. But he talked about the hero's journey across culture. And like I said, I've always been reading. I always knew I was going to do this. So Mom being the librarian, we turned on PBS and we watched the entire set of interviews. And he talked about there being a hero's journey between cultures that had never had anything to do with one another before. And these stories, these mythologies, all followed a similar pattern in that you have a reluctant hero that goes on a journey, is tested, there's some sort of a crucible, and then he emerges transformed on the other side. Right. So, that's another 1988. It's a very impressionable time for me, and kind of building my foundation for the future.
How old were you in 1988?
Oh, gosh, I'm 46 now. So, what was I, 13 or something?
Yeah.
I was born in 89.
Oh, jeez.
Hey, I'm with you. I'm almost 45.
Okay. Oh, yeah. A lot of mileage between the.
Brent could be my son.
There's 16 between you and Dad, and 15 between me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
Yeah.
Weird family.
But as I was writing, before I started writing, and as I was reading from then on, I always thought back to that journey, and I saw the movies that I like to watch and the books I like to read. They all had protagonists that followed these similar type of a pattern. Right. And there's a reason for that. It's the oral tradition of storytelling around the fire. People come back from the hunt, they come back from war, and they tell those stories around the fire. And then there's fictional versions, and they get handed down to have some sort of a moral attached to them to teach the next generation, pass on those lessons. So as I'm writing this, I'm thinking about how you do that with one story, okay? But then how do you do that over a series, like with the Mitch Rapp series? How do you do it over that series? How do you do it with Daniel Silver, with Gabriel Allon, who's his protagonist? How do you do that over 20 books, 19 books? And so that's very much in the forefront of my mind as I write, is how you do that with individual stories, but in some overarching type story. This is why in the novels I have the little touch points with the past in there, with his father, grandfather, and leave little hints that give me options going forward. So I'm trying to think 3 or 4 books ahead, like where I'm going and where this longer story arc will take the reader. So I'm thinking about that stuff constantly
ahead of time
as I go. Yeah.
Because I have more questions in that vein as well. But before we get there, I still want to hammer on this thing. So Jordan Peterson author of 12 books.
I know. I need to read it. I've listened to all his podcasts, a bunch of podcasts with him, of course.
So
I think he's great.
He
Jordan,
mentions
the man,
this
Peterson.
archetype,
Okay.
which is kind of the hero myth across all cultures being the same, similar, and how it resonates with
I haven't heard him talk about that. I'll have to find that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because he kind of talks about where this really comes out are in his lectures on the Old Testament, like some of the stories of Cain and Abel,
right,
and how old that story is since the beginning of time, right? Like there's different modes of being as a human being. Like you can choose to be Cain or you can choose to be Abel, and there's just fundamental things about humanity that are baked into that have survived thousands and thousands of years.
Oh yeah, the Bible follows that same pattern we just talked about.
And he talks about that. He talks about Pinocchio.
Oh, really?
That's one of the other things he talks about, like the story of Pinocchio. In order for Pinocchio to become a boy, to become a man, he has to and not just be, manipulated by puppet, like a puppet on a string. He has to go out into the world and overcome its darkest things. And you can't know yourself as a human. You can't know what you're capable of without actually, and then know yourself without actually going up against these things and testing your mettle. There's a certain amount of life experience. And so Pinocchio goes out and he does this sort of stuff. And it's through doing that he's able to rescue his father. And there's some kind of meaning there, like he couldn't go and rescue his father without enduring all of these things. He's not capable of it, but then he does, and now he's capable of it. And this story of a man going out in the unknown, conquering, and then rescuing their father he talks about it being tied to Egyptian and earlier stories. Tens of thousands of years where you have this idea. So when I think what makes a good story, I think a lot the same as what you're describing. But then getting that onto paper or getting that into that's like, I kind of understand the ingredients, I guess, but
it was very natural for me because reading all those things growing up and knowing what I wanted to do, it wasn't just, hey, at some point over the last 20 years, as I was getting ready to get out of the military, I thought, what am I going to do next? Oh, maybe I can make some money writing. What does that entail?
Right.
Like, it wasn't like that at all. No, it was like, I've always known what I was wanting to do. I laid that foundation early, even though I didn't really know that those guys were giving me an early education in the art of storytelling. It was just something I liked to do. I just loved to read. But that laid the foundation. And then when I went into the military, I'm reading stuff and I'm studying terrorism. I'm studying insurgencies. I'm studying where we're going in the world so that I can make the best decisions possible under fire for my guys. And then I have that experience from being downrange also. So from being in Iraq and Afghanistan. So all those things kind of coalesced at the right time as I was getting out. And I made that decision that it's time to leave the military behind, time to get out and take care of the family, take a breath, and okay, I'm going to write. That's what I'm going to do. So what does that mean? Oh, it means you have to sit down and write. And I'm like, great, because that's what I've always wanted to do other than be a SEAL. So what I did was I wrote down about like executive summaries, so kind of like your professional business writing, 6 or 7 different ideas on pieces of paper, like one pagers, half a page, and put them all down on a table. And I looked at all of them, and then I picked the one that I thought would resonate the most with readers and with New York publishing. And that was a story of revenge, because that's what really resonated with me as a kid. That's what I like to read. Those are the movies that I like to watch. Like, there's a reason there's how many Death Wish movies are there? There's a reason there's so many.
Right.
I think it resonates with people. Just like that oral tradition of storytelling, it resonates. That same type of a story.
It's a certain amount of justice that
you feel good.
We seek.
Exactly. You can't do it in real life for the most part. But you can in a movie, and you can in the pages of a fictional thriller. If you do it in real life, you get in a lot of trouble. You can't necessarily do it, but it feels good to read about somebody or to watch somebody that is doing that. And then I thought, you know what? A lot of these movies and books, they talk about like someone that has nothing left to lose. And, that's a typical thing that they say. When you hear the voiceover,
like you're already dead.
Yeah,
I heard you mention that.
So I was like, well, you always have something left to lose. Every time I heard that, or I hear that as part of a tagline for a movie, I'd see it and be like, well, he does have some things left to lose, like his life. And so I thought, how do you take that away? And in studying Bushido a little bit growing up, and the Code of the Samurai, and I read somewhere that they would go into battle thinking they were already dead, so thinking they weren't going to make it out, and that made them more effective and efficient warriors. So I thought, how do you take that construct and apply it to a modern thriller whose theme is revenge without constraint? How do you do that? And so that's where the conspiracy to testing drugs on our nation's most elite soldiers comes into play, that has these side effects that actually end up creating brain tumors and killing them. So now the protagonist is freed up from everything. His family's gone, his troops gone, but he's unraveled this conspiracy. He thinks he's dying, and he has these people on a list, and he's going to put them all on the ground before he dies. So he's essentially been freed up and really has nothing left to lose.
A little Jason Bourne-ish kind of like.
Well, even him, I don't think he was dying of anything.
No.
So I needed to really free my character up to be able to do what he needed to do and be as vicious as he could possibly be, which was very therapeutic. Actually, it was very therapeutic to write.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, so I had a great, and so from there, once I picked that story, the title came right away, and then I wrote an outline, and the outline I filled in. Then I started to write, and as I wrote, then I'd fill in the outline as new ideas would come to me, or little twists here and there, or whatever it was. I would fill in that outline so I'd have a visual representation of what I was writing. And then about the 75% or so mark, that became not as effective or efficient to do that anymore, so I discarded the outline and just continued writing in Word. And I've since discovered Scrivener. Yes, so awesome. People talked to me about it a couple times, and I was just too busy to try it. And then I did it this time for book number 3, and I love it. I absolutely love it.
I'm gonna have to look into that.
Yeah.
So for some people that are listening, they might look at this as primarily a hunting podcast where we talk outdoors and hunting, or maybe fitness. But I feel like the ability to communicate and to tell your story is part of every human endeavor that we take on, including maybe sharing our story as hunters, gatherers and providers, and learning how to write, learning how to tell a story, learning how to communicate, I think is if I feel like I've heard this said before, if you're skilled at that, it doesn't matter what walk of life or what career path you choose, you will be successful in life.
Interesting.
If you can tell a good story, you will win in life. And that's kind of a powerful idea.
Yeah, well, it's marketing. It's everything. It's every presentation that you see that's good. It's a story. It's not just a bunch of slides going up and people spitting off facts. If they know what they're doing, they're telling a story in that presentation. And we're all on a journey.
You're not going to be president if you can't tell a story. Like there's, you know what I mean? Like you
don't even have to tell a very good one.
You don't even think about it. But once I heard that, I can't remember where I heard that. That's when I started to rethink storytelling. In terms of a life skill, not just one for a writer or a movie maker or a marketer, but it's an every human, every person's skill.
Yeah, well, we're all on a journey. We're all essentially writing our own story, and you can learn from the past. Hopefully, it makes you wiser as you move forward. Control the present as much as you can, or make decisions in the present so that you can move into the future and go where you want to go. And we have that opportunity here in this country. We have all the freedom to make those kind of decisions, and we're all on this journey. And essentially, each chapter of our life is like a book in an overarching type story. So my military part was one story, and each chapter in there, the different deployments were different chapters in that book. And now I'm on another book now, but it's all part of this bigger journey. So I think we all identify with that hero's journey. That's why these movies and books are so successful.
Well, and let's talk about that too, because I think there's a lot of people who can't tell a story to save their life.
My wife can't tell a story to save her life. When she comes and she starts talking, I ask her, is there a punchline to this story? Because if there's not some kind of punchline, let's wrap it up.
Should we edit that out later? Does she listen to this? I don't know. That sounds rough.
I think like, and I'll take kind of a real world example here and throw it at you. So, comic books are like Jordan Peterson references those, where he says, it is the archetypical story, right? You have your
good versus evil,
good evil kind of thing, and your hero. The best heroes in general are the ones that are that struggle. Like Batman, his parents die. He's an only kid kind of thing, and he overcomes it, or
Goes into the cave.
He goes into the cave.
Emerges.
Exactly. And, Spider-Man, his uncle dies, and then and while he's off goofing around with these new powers, and then he realized he could have used them to do something like, and each of them have these human frailty things, these issues that they overcome, and then they go out into the world and they fight evil. And this story is old as time. Yep. And so there's a reason, I think, why comic book stories are killers at the box office all the time, because they're that same story like you were describing earlier, where we all can relate to it.
Oh yeah.
And yet recently we got to see Captain Marvel, which came out.
I did not see it. So
I didn't either.
Okay.
Partly because it's very political.
Oh, is it? I don't know.
And so in that film, rather than sticking with an archetype, so the Captain Marvel character wasn't written by an actual comic book person. Like everything else is taken from the comic book, right? But this one, their social justice warrior kind of thing came about, and they're like, we need a pro-woman person that's, that fits these political social justice categories of, she doesn't need a man. She can conquer she's this.
Vegan?
Probably, yeah. All that stuff rolled into it, right? And they presented it to the public, and it didn't do well.
Interesting.
It didn't do well. And of course it didn't do well because, white supremacy and like male toxic masculinity. Like those are the reasons why it didn't do well. It didn't do well because it just sucked as a movie. I could care less if it's a woman or a male, or I don't care.
Right.
A good story is a good story, and I think other stories like Alita came out at the same time in theater
Alita,
and pop
Battle
culture.
Angel.
Battle Angel. You have Sigourney Weaver in Alien, and we've
Terminator.
had female
badasses.
heroes, badasses forever that men love, right? Mm-hmm. But I felt like they when they came out with this Captain Marvel idea, they ignored this hero myth story. And they just produced some kind of like political piece and it didn't resonate. Yeah. Humanity was like, something feels wrong here.
It's in our DNA. It's in our DNA for whatever reason. It's that sixth sense that keeps you alive on the battlefield or gets you killed if you don't listen to it. There's some reason this story and this mythology, it's in our DNA. We are attracted to that story because we all have things we have to overcome in life. We're all going to hit adversity. If you haven't yet, you will. And you're going to be tested. And that's what all these stories are about. They're all about someone that is tested, and they overcome that adversity somehow, and they emerge transformed and wiser on the other side. And in life, that is life. You are going to be tested. There are things are going to happen to you that are not pleasant, and you're going to need to figure out how to deal with those. And you're either going to learn from them and become wiser and move forward, or they can destroy you. And that's the same story that's been told from the beginning of time. And there's a reason that we sit there in the movie theater and identify with that, or we identify with it in the pages of a novel.
So why do you think, what do you think people do wrong then? When they're trying to tell a story, and they're trying to, let's say, write a story like you have, and it doesn't work.
I think they can ignore those elements. For me, it's very natural to, if you didn't know about Joseph Campbell, you didn't know about the power of myth, and you hadn't seen those interviews as a kid or later in life, and you hadn't read his book called Hero with 1,000 Faces. That's pretty much his seminal work.
Interesting.
If you hadn't seen those, you would probably naturally write a story like that anyway, because it is so natural, it is so ingrained in our DNA, and you have all these inputs throughout your life, whether you know it or not, that are telling you that story. Like all the Disney, the Pinocchio example, Star Wars is a great example. All of those. So even if you didn't know, so it is possible to be very successul as a writer or as a filmmaker and not understand those. Exactly, because it's just such a part of us. But you can also, if for whatever reason, if it didn't resonate with you and all those inputs from your youth up to today if it didn't click, you could definitely make a mistake, and you could have somebody who you created as a hero, and write their story, and maybe they didn't face adversity. Maybe they don't emerge transformed. Maybe it's the same person at the beginning as it is at the end. So there are certain things that you could possibly ignore if you were oblivious. But if you're at that stage where you're making a film or at a book at this level, like probably your editor, your agent, or somebody would recognize in these industries that you've missed the mark somehow.
Okay. Yeah, right.
So and they'd probably either help you along or you'd get pushed to the side. And then you can also just write a bad one about a character that people don't like. Like you might maybe test it and move on, and maybe you just don't like this person.
Let me ask you that.
Because you can write a bad guy that people like, and that's very popular. Now, that's something that's new over the last 20 years. Is like The Shield, the TV show, where you have this totally corrupt cop, but for whatever reason, you're rooting for him. You want to watch the next episode because you want to see what he does and how he gets out of this trouble that he's in or whatever it is. So you're rooting for this guy because he has certain elements that are likable.
Yep.
For whatever reason. So
something
creating,
redeems him.
something does redeem. He has to have a redeemable quality. And so in writing this book, the first one, and creating this character of James Reese, I wanted to have somebody that was likable. So I thought about that from the very beginning. I wanted it to be somebody that you want to sit down and have a beer with, whatever, have some coffee with, but also that could flip that switch because of his training and his experience, and just because of how he's wired, and go get the job done. So that was really what I was after.
So I would say a series I read that I mean, I will just drop it out there. Game of Thrones.
Okay.
Did you watch Game of Thrones? Did you read Game of Thrones?
The only person that didn't watch or read it. Yes,
well,
I did not.
You got too much work to do. You're conquering.
I did meet George R. R. Martin though, so I did get to talk to him and shake his hand and talk to him for a little bit. He was great. Yeah, he was amazing.
Because here's the deal: I hate Game of Thrones.
Okay, the books and
the movie and the show. I almost on principle though. Because, and I'll ask you this because, and people that watched it all the way to the end and just saw the finale, a lot of them were, I mean, I'd say the overwhelming majority were quite disappointed with how it ended.
It's tough to end something that's so popular in a way that people are going to like.
Well, they didn't.
But here's my thing is I bailed out. I've read the first 3.5 books. I was 4 books in, 3.5 books in. And in the first book, there's a character that's that sort of inspiring, noble character. He's
the redeemable one, like you said, from The Shield. That guy, there's something redeemable about him.
In fact, you relate to him somehow.
In fact, he's your ideal human. Like, if you were to think of someone that...
You got to be rooting for him, too. I think as a reader or the watcher in the movie theater, you got to be rooting for somebody.
Not that I need someone to be perfect, but someone that's noble.
Yeah.
Like, I need someone that, I need them when no one is watching, and when they have nothing to gain from it, do something altruistic. Right. I need them to, at some level, be a selfless human being, or someone who cares about other things greater than themselves, and is willing to do what is right, let's say morally right, instead of just doing what is expedient. And everyone like that dies in the first book.
Oh, bummer.
That's the whole point of the series. If you have something redeemable,
you
have
dead.
to die.
You suck, by the way.
And for some reason that worked. There must be something about it.
And the most evil people, and some of the horrible people, they continue to win. And it's a book about evil beating good. That's the whole thing is about the evil beating the good. Like, and every time you think the good might come back up and win, no.
Well, I wish I'd seen it or read it now, so then I could speak to it. And that's one
of the things that fascinates me is then why did so many people? Why were they drawn to it? Why did it work so well? Why was
There's a lot of sex and violence in there, right?
And that's my thing is I think that as humans we are drawn to darkness too, and there's a certain amount of evil that's just rampant throughout the whole thing that it's almost like tantalizing to be part of it. There's a part of me as I was reading the book going, okay, I'm definitely engaged. I'm definitely sucked into the story. I'm definitely pulled along. But I also feel a little like darkness in me.
Yeah.
Like my soul feels a little tainted being on this journey.
Interesting.
And it got to a point where I just was like, this doesn't uplift me, actually. Right. This actually discourages me about being good, about being, I guess, selfless, maybe. Yeah. It's almost the message that the strong are what survive, not the good. And I don't know. It was and so. For
maybe
me,
the formula there is you're hoping that there's a change in one of these people. Maybe in our
absolutely.
And
you're
that's what we're
hoping
waiting for.
that who's going to be the good person?
And they
It has
tease
to
but
be.
it
Well, that
never
might be it.
happens.
It never
Never happens.
Well, maybe that's why there was disappointment at the end.
Oh, I think
you're
so.
sticking through
But
this thing
after you get that deep into it and you stuck around to the end, you had it coming because he never once gave you that.
Yeah.
Never. After I was 3 or 4 books in and they hadn't brought in a new character or hadn't had a character actually redeem themselves, I was like, I'm done. It's like watching Lost.
Yeah, I didn't watch that one
You
either.
know what? After 3 or 4 episodes, I'm out. Like if you can't circle back or you can't close loops or there can't be, if you're just tantalizing and teasing me over and over and over again,
right?
I see what you're doing. It's like a video game is just trying to
maybe that's
hook you as long as possible.
Maybe that's the drug. Maybe that's what got people in there, even though it didn't fit that typical story. Maybe you were expecting it because of everything that you've been programmed with from essentially your earliest days. You're expecting that piece, but it never comes.
It never happens.
Here's my theory on that. I could be wrong, but here's my theory. It's not a meaningful piece when you're done.
Yeah.
To me.
Didn't learn.
It's not meaningful because at the end of the day, you were teased and it was exciting and you were tantalized. But when you walk away, you don't go 5 years from now. You're not inspired by what you saw. Mm-hmm. It doesn't transform you into a different kind of person. Where maybe reading Lord of the Rings and watching Frodo and Samwise do the thing, and you see the twisted character of Gollum go back and forth and struggle. And you walk away from that, I feel like transformed, changed in a way where you are actually inspired by that story, and maybe now you walk away with that with some meaning for your own life.
Well, it'll be interesting to see over time how the series, both books and the TV series, how that holds up over time. Yeah, because you have certain things that do, like Rocky. We all identify with the story of Rocky, and for a reason. We have a reluctant hero, right? He turns it down. He turns down the heavyweight title shot at first. He's not that interested. And then He accepts that he's a reluctant hero, goes into the boxing gym, goes into the cave, trains
Underdog.
with Mick. You definitely have a mentor in these stories too. You have that older person that can impart wisdom along the way.
Yep.
And so that's Mick, Mick in the gym right there.
Yeah.
And then he emerges and he's tested again. And the first one, he doesn't win, but he has that fight. And you think you feel like he wins because he stepped up and boom, Bloody's the champion. And at the end, he's standing tall. So that resonates.
You never at any point are like,
you never want Rocky to lose.
It's not that. Well, yeah, that. But I feel like good storytelling, I don't want to ever have to sit there and go, what am I doing here? And that's what I have my big problem with Game of Thrones. It's like sports. When I sit down, I know who I'm rooting for. There are good guys and there are bad guys. In Game of Thrones, I don't know who to root for. In Rocky, it's obvious.
Yeah,
you're going to root for Rocky.
Yeah, well, I keep using Sylvester Stallone, but he was a big part of my childhood. But I feel like I was raised by Stallone at times. But same thing, First Blood. You have him, you have reluctant hero, and then he goes into a cave.
Yeah, Rambo.
Yep, and then he comes out, and who does he have? A mentor. Who comes in? Colonel Sam Troutman, who represents the U.S. government. Uncle Sam comes in to help, and then at the end they had to change that ending because at the end of I don't want to give it away now to people who haven't read the book. It's a classic novel, but it's been out since 1972, so
exactly.
I feel like
no
you can.
I
feel like I should be able to, but it's also old enough where people have only seen the movie,
right? Totally,
and they haven't visited the book, so I'll let that one go. Point being, there's a reluctant hero, there's a mentor, there's somebody who emerges transformed at the end. That's how.
Tell me this: who is one of your favorite mentor characters?
Oh, that's a good question.
Miyagi.
There you go, Mr. Miyagi. That's a great one right there. Yeah. No, you have that. Yeah, each and every one has, like, even if we go back to Star Wars, who do you have? You have Yoda. Where does Luke go? He goes into the swamps. It's dark. It's a cave.
Right.
He gets knowledge, and then he moves on to complete the mission type thing. So Yoda's a classic example of somebody that's a mentor. In the first one, Obi-Wan in the first one, you have these guys that keep reappearing in that role over time. We just talked about Sam Troutman. We talked about Mick. But if you look at these, and a lot of these stories that hold up over time, they all have that mentor that comes in and imparts knowledge along the way. And it's just a part of the deal.
Well, it is so representative of life, though, too. You were mentioning your previous career with Jocko, and you were describing how you were learning from mentors.
Sure,
people
that's the most important piece.
Who had, and there was a difference between maybe a mentor who had actually fought in battle versus one who had just read about it on paper.
Sure. Yep. I was very fortunate to meet a guy named James Jarrett early on, who's and like I said, growing up in the 80s, we couldn't just reach out on social media and be like, oh, look at that guy. It says Special Forces or it says SEALs in his little bio here. I'll DM him and see if he gets back to me.
I know.
So he didn't have that. So I knew very few people in the military, if anybody, until a little later on. But so I met this guy who was a Special Forces sniper in Vietnam, part of Project Delta, which was the origins of what later became Delta Force, because of one of the commanding officers of Project Delta in Vietnam, when he was a major at the time, then went on to be the first commanding officer of what became Delta Force.
What was his name?
Colonel Charlie Beckwith. And wrote a book called the Delta Force.
I read that. Yeah,
back in the 80s, probably, right? It came out in 1985.
Yep.
So
it was a great book.
Late 70s. He created that unit. And
was fascinating, by the way. I mean, I love that book.
Yeah, I don't know if I can revisit it now, though. I'm not sure.
I just read it 2 years ago.
Oh, nice.
And it spoke to me.
Nice.
Just hearing. It was all new at the time.
Yeah,
some of the things that they were doing.
Yeah, when that came out, you're like, wow, they're lock picking. Like, whoa, and they had a picture of the lock pick set. You're like, this is the best ever. This is what I dreamed about doing. This is like the G.I. Joe cartoon that I'm watching, And but I met this guy that was part of that in Vietnam, and so we had that experience, and kind of took me under his wing, taught me how to shoot, taught me how to think logically, because he's a very intelligent man. So we all have these mentors. And then once in the SEAL teams, one of my first commanding officers after I became an officer about the 6.5, 7 year mark, and he had spent the first year deployed after 9/11, so he'd been in Afghanistan since then. And he became the commanding officer of SEAL Team 2, and we have a bunch of new officers coming in, of which I am one. And he wanted to impart that knowledge that he got, because we hadn't been in sustained combat operations since Vietnam. Yeah, we had flashpoints here and there. We had Desert One, of course, and then we had Grenada and Panama, Mogadishu. So we had these flashpoints here, but it wasn't sustained combat operations. And now this was the first year of almost constant fighting, sustained combat for the first time since Vietnam. And he wanted to impart some of those lessons that he learned downrange, and didn't just read about, but now he's experienced them. He wanted to pass that on to us, and he did so. And he gave us some very basic elements, and we can talk a little bit about them, because I think they apply to life in general. Not just tactical situations, and they apply strategically, and they can even apply to your family, like in a relationship. But his first one was always improve your fighting position. Second one was exploit all technical and tactical advantages. And
by the way, it was in Terminal List.
Yes, that's right. So I weave those things in. I weave some stuff from Jocko that I learned from Jocko in. I weave some things that I learned from this James Jarrett that I just mentioned earlier. So I weave these things that I've learned in my life. I weave those kind of into the storyline. Leadership lessons, things that they imparted to me, things that I learned on my own, feelings and emotions that I got from downrange attached to certain events made their way into these pages. But yeah, he passed these things on, and I passed them on then. And everybody that was part of that group has passed them on, really, to everybody they've worked with since. He said the third one was push situational awareness, which is a fancy military way of saying information. Push it up and down the chain of command. So build that common operating picture so everybody can make the best decisions possible, no matter where they are in that. And then the fourth one, which was the most important to me, he said, in the absence of orders or direction on the battlefield, take charge and lead. And so that's what I always wanted to leave my guys with, was that one, because whether they're just a brand new guy in charge of essentially themselves, they need to lead themselves, and they need to be an example to their peers. But if anything happens downrange, boom, IED goes off. Now we're separated. Chaos, plans changing. Going through the contingencies in our heads. What do we have available out there to help? Take a breath, look around, make a call. Got that from Jocko, but I expect each and every person to lead. So he passed those on to us, and I passed them on to everybody I've worked with since.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to read. That's the thing where, as I read the book, and there's so much detail that you even mentioned with Jocko that you made a phone call to him. You're like, so if a guy was going to learn jiu-jitsu in San Diego or whatever,
Virginia Beach, I'm like, this is the year, this is where they are, stationed in Virginia Beach. Like, where would they go? Who would they go to?
What gym and what
That's some serious attention to detail.
Right,
well,
but
I would never even think about that.
Well, I don't want Jocko to read this thing and get mad. I was like the last person on earth you want to piss off. So I want to make sure I had that part right, so I know who to call.
Yeah, right. Like, I
There's
think
a couple
that's
people you don't want to tick off.
Exactly.
I think that's really good though, because let's say you never know how you're going to relate to a reader or someone that's following along. And for someone that hasn't been involved in that world, it's just a detail. But for someone like Jocko that reads it, it adds so much credibility.
That's
when you're describing the weapon, the hunting rig, the Sitka gear, the unit, the Wyoming, like all these things, I'm like, you're one of my people. Like, boom, just like that. And you don't get that with an author that let's say you had written it differently, didn't have all those details and that information. I would be like, he's just an author writing a book, not someone actually telling the story.
Right. Yeah. So it is that. I mean, that is that authenticity piece and the credibility piece. It just comes naturally because I lived that life for so long. So it's very natural for me to put that in there. Very natural for me to talk about gear because I was always looking for that thing that would give us an edge downrange. And that's why I was at SHOT Show it's like, if you went to SHOT Show back in 2004, that was my first one.
Yeah.
It was hunting everywhere in this tiny little room that had some like black web gear stuff in it, a couple black rifles.
Right.
And now that's everywhere.
Yeah, it is.
But I kept going over the years. So I watched that whole industry evolve. And typically not for everything, but for a lot of things, the private sector was a little bit ahead of the military, just because they could innovate a little faster, not on everything, but on a lot of things. And I always wanted my guys to have the best gear. Is there a lighter, better pack that we can have downrange? Where's that coming from? That's for sure coming from the civilian side of the house, from the private sector. And there are things like that. So I was always going to SHOT Show, always involved, just naturally had a lot of relationships in that industry. And it's very natural for me to put those into the book.
Yeah, and it comes through. I want to backtrack a little bit and get back to the part about the outlines that you create.
Yeah.
Because I feel like that's an area where I guess that's a critical piece.
For me, it is. I think everybody has a different process, and there's not one right way or wrong way. This is just the way that I happened to use, and I didn't read it in a book. This is just what I did because of what I read growing up, and I read stories in 6th, 7th, 8th grade type thing. And it was just, if I sat down and thought, okay, how am I going to write a book? Okay, we'll start with an idea. Okay, boom. Title came very naturally. Then what would you do? Where's this thing going to go? Okay, a little 1-page synopsis. Okay, well, now let's break that down into 3 parts because people deal with, and a lot of books have more than 3 parts, but I thought, okay, people deal with like 3s. And a 3-part story arc is something that's very natural. And I think it lends itself well to something like this. So how do I do that? And that's where I started.
Okay.
And just wrote it in Word. Just started filling that thing in. Now in Scrivener, I didn't start there. I started in Word, and I started with Scrivener about halfway through.
Yeah.
And then I transported everything that I had in Word over. It lets you import from Word.
Nice.
So this book number 4, the one I'm about to start here in August, that one will be the first one that I do from beginning to end in Scrivener. And I'll start with that outline that they have and be able to visually see that and very easily look at that as I'm writing or about to start a new chapter.
And you mentioned you can drag and drop.
That's what's so great. Yeah. So this
like
time,
research and information.
Yeah, you can pull videos in, you can pull pictures in, you can pull websites in, and have folders for your research along the way that correspond with chapters. So it's amazing. So you're not, for the first 2 books, I was going back like, I hope my internet history's in there because I think I remember what this thing was called and I really want to get back to that one news article. Where was it again? Well, now I just copy it, drag it right in, and it's in there forever attached to that chapter as my research folder.
Because
it's great.
Brent just produced all on his own, pretty much by himself, a film, a video. It's very linear, chronological, but nonetheless, it's super clean. It's a good edit of this bear hunt that I did with Ryan Lamper's Stealthy Hunter, Jeff Lusk. And I did the first 3 videos in the series, and there's a 4th one that we needed to get done. And so handed it over, and Brent did it. Well, it wasn't that simple. I mean, I
that sounds pretty clean.
I put him through the ringer for months, and especially like a 2-week grilling period. And I probably shouldn't be an instructor of any kind. Like I'm a taskmaster mostly.
Hey, gotta delegate. Yeah. It's good to know what you're good at and what you're not.
I should say this. I'm not really good at, I don't take the time to be gentle. If I don't like it, I just tell you, I didn't like this, and this. I'm very direct about it.
You don't have time to.
And I don't really take the time to go, but you did a really good job here and all this before I like dump on you.
Right.
I just go, it was good. But these are all your problems.
Got it.
and I just crap on you.
Yeah.
I've been working on it, but
it all works in progress.
But Brent and Brent's a little more sensitive than me in that regard, so I have to like be a little less.
There's a thing called the criticism sandwich, where you start with a compliment, then you give them the crap, but then you also segue into another compliment as you're leaving.
It's called bedside manner, I think. They call it in the medical field.
Something.
Yeah, I don't have time for the Brent.
No,
don't have time for the Brent.
You gotta get to that next patient.
That's right.
They're waiting.
And so, anyway, he got the edit done, and it was really well done. But one of the things that I watched as Brent was trying to do it was he would just try to build a story, just try to jump right in and just start just putting it together without a true outline, without a really good outline. And I've found, throughout my life that an outline is everything. It's what I live and die on. And the more fleshed out that outline can get, before I even start a story or start a project, that's critical.
Yeah. No, it has been for me.
It's like storyboarding in a way.
Oh, yeah, exactly what it is. And that's what Scrivener lets you do is hit that button and boom, it goes up all over the screen like Post-it notes, and you can drag and drop them instead of in Word.
Wow.
Like copying and then pasting because you're worried that if you cut it, it's going to disappear, and then you go back and then you delete down here, and then you're scrolling and trying to picture in your head, especially over something that's 130,000 words like this is.
Yeah.
Like, how does that fit? How does that visually look if I break these chapters down or I break these sections down? What does that look like? So it definitely helps on with that sort of thing. But Kyle Mills, who now writes the Vince Flynn novels, who's continued that after Vince Flynn passed away, who does a fantastic job with it. He does huge outlines, and he told me that they're a book in themselves. So when he's done with the outline, so now he essentially goes back and fills in the outline and turns it into a book. And that's not how I do it, but I can see that as working, but that works for him. So he knows exactly what's going to happen, exactly where it's going to go. He's worked all those problems out in the outline. So for me, I do kind of a hybrid of that. So I have that outline, I'll be writing, but I'll still have questions. I don't know quite how this is going to work in here. Well, how am I going to make this make sense at this part? But I know I'll get to it. I'm confident that as I write and as I think through this, because I'm thinking of it constantly, 24/7, it's always going in my head. There's never a time I take a break. And I'll be able to work those out because it's like aggressively solving problems on the battlefield. It's not like I can not do it. Like I have to do it because the guys, their lives are essentially in the hands of this team, and I'm a part of that team. We have to make good, solid, logical decisions under fire. Same thing, a lot less dire consequences, but now I'm doing it on the pages of a novel. So it's going to get done. I'm going to solve these problems. I'm not worried. I'm not going to give up because, I don't know how it's going to work out. I guess I'm not good at this. No, I'm going to figure that out. It's going to happen as I write. Whereas somebody like Kyle Mills, he's already figured that out in the outline. So, there are plenty of different ways to
style,
do it.
For sure. Brent works a little different than me, and I understand that creative leeway needs to be present for him. He's better at certain things than I am, and I'm better in other areas.
I will say that I know where I'm going to go. Where I'm going to get to.
And that's the problem that I have. Well, it's not necessarily that I don't know where I'm going to go.
I know the ending before I start.
Yeah, but with hunting films especially, I don't know if it's my mic or if it's underneath. But anyways, with hunting films, you can't make more footage.
Right.
You have to work with what you got. Yeah. And that's the hard part for me is that I can't just make something up.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it takes a certain level of creativity because when you get home, you have what you recorded.
Yep.
When you hit record in the field, that's what you ended up with. And so when you get back, you're going over it and you're like, dude, we should have filmed this, and this, and that would have made the story feel, flow so much better.
But for someone that doesn't know that, like when we just watched this amazing film that you guys did, it was awesome on the moose hunt, British Columbia, so cool. And you mentioned that you wish we had this other angle so we'd see these other moose that were there. But for me, who wasn't there, that didn't know there were these other moose there, and they were choosing between which one and how that went down. It's beautiful. It's amazing. It's a great film. So there's always going to be that if you're intimately involved in its creation. Like there's definitely things in here I can make better. There's things in the first book I can make better, but it's really by degree. You can work on something forever.
It's very
and never
true.
Put it out there.
Oh, you can work on something forever.
Yep. At a certain point, you got to just get it out there.
Yep.
I also would say, Brent wanted to ask you this earlier. We talked
a little bit about this during the movie because this is the big problem that I had. There. This is the big problem I had was I would make this part and it was maybe funny or I just liked it. Whatever it was, I spent a lot of time on it. I really liked it, but it really screwed up the rest of the film.
Yep.
and then you have to kill your babies.
Kill the babies, as Stephen King says.
How do you go about that? Because I struggle with it. That's probably my biggest stumbling block.
And I kill his babies left and right. Kill that one. That is like he spent a whole day on it. I'm like,
it's definitely easier to kill someone else's children than your own. But yeah, Stephen King talks about it in his book On Writing. And so what I did for the first one and for the second one too, but first one is a better example because I didn't have a background. I came from nowhere in this industry. But I'd read or heard, I forget if it's in Stephen Pressfield's books on creativity or if I heard him on the Joe Rogan podcast talk about it when he was on there.
Okay.
But regardless, it came from Stephen Pressfield. And he said he would take the theme of his novel and write it on a yellow sticky. And he'd put it down. In his case, it might have been next to a typewriter. So I took that and I wrote revenge on a yellow sticky. And I put that on my little MacBook. And so it was there the whole time. The whole time I was writing, put tape on the other side. So revenge. So as I was writing, I had this visual revenge. And if a paragraph, a sentence, anything did not directly or indirectly, more importantly, tie back to that theme of revenge, like as I was writing, delete, done. Already done. So I'm editing. They say don't edit as you go, and I don't know if that counts or not. But and I do edit as I go in general. But in that respect, it really helped me stay on point, helped me stay on theme. And by the time it got to New York, and I didn't even we can talk about that stuff later. How I got it there, and I didn't have an agent or anything, which you're supposed to have. And I'm glad I didn't know I was supposed to have it because it might not be published today. But there was very little editing that happened once it got to New York. And it ended up on the desk if you could choose one person in the world to like your novel in New York, it would be Emily Bessler.
Right.
Emily Bessler books. Yeah. That's who got it, thanks to Brad Thor, who cracked the door open for me.
That's awesome, man.
But when it came back, I thought it would be tons of edits because they're the professionals at Simon & Schuster. Like they're going to edit it. Yeah. And then it came back, there was like 3 questions. Like, hey, would he really think this here? Would he really do this here? And like one other thing I can't remember right now, but there was like 3 things. It's like, that's it? Really? I mean, there's lots of copy editing, but as far as content editing, like that was it. And I think it's because of that yellow sticky that said revenge that kept me on.
That's what I do. Theme. I do the same thing, and I talked to Brent about it, and I'm like, you have to look at the story, and you have maybe your 3 or 4 core ideas or 2 in this sequence that I want people to walk away from this with. When someone watches like our bear series, I want them to walk away with an understanding about bears and bear behavior. I want them to walk away with an understanding about thermals and how they work. I want them to walk away with some ideas on the gear we use, why we use it maybe. I want them to walk away with an understanding of how you would go on a stalk on a bear in this situation. And so I want you to easily see with graphics and lines drawn and topo maps, like, boom, how did we do that? And those are sort of some of the theme elements. And so I also want people to walk away feeling like they were there with us. Just banter, humor.
Yeah, that worked on that one we just watched.
Yeah, awesome. just like this is what every, I guess, outdoors person, hunter can relate to. But within that, there are certain elements that sort of don't help tell that story. They're just, you just kind of like it. Yeah. And it actually takes you away from that path. Yeah. And I'll watch something that maybe he's still really learning. He'll do, and I'll be like, yeah, it's great, but it just
doesn't work.
Doesn't tell the story. It doesn't keep the story moving in this direction. It's like revenge, and then it's like instead of revenge, you've gone over here toward, I don't know, like, like I like rock climbing. It's like, wait a minute, like it doesn't propel the story.
Theme, and then you have sub themes as well. So I've thought sub themes in the first novel, sub themes in this second one. But the government overreach and times of peril, like that's a sub theme.
Yep.
But that main theme is revenge. So I think it's important to keep on track with that. But you can go and have sub themes, I think, throughout, like 3 sub themes or so that kind of work their way in also. But that main one, kind of, you have to stick to that. And killing babies, like there was one chapter in here in True Believer that I loved, but about 5 people in the world would get it because 5 people were on this trip to Mozambique, where I did research for this and know the person that essentially I'm making fun of a little bit in there. And I loved it, but it didn't make sense. Like, 5 people are going to get it, and I'm going to love it. But
he's horrible about that. He's horrible about that.
Yeah. That's what I do all the time because there'll be something funny or a snippet or almost an inside joke, really, that comes along, and I want it in there. But at the end of the day, if someone says, what? to any frame that's in there or any
Right.
scene whatsoever, I know that I've done something wrong.
Right.
And
Well, I leave
that-
little
that-
nuggets. I do leave little nuggets in here for people in the know, but it's a sentence
Easter
or
eggs
it's
are
a
cool.
word
Yeah,
in there
yeah.
that just a
It
few
doesn't
people are going to get. It's not
take
a whole,
you,
it's not like a whole chapter or a whole section of a chapter.
I'll watch something that Brent gets, and I'll know why he wanted to keep it in there. And I'm like, there's 10 people who
Right.
will
Will appreciate
resonate.
with,
Yeah. And it's super funny and it's cool, but you have the context.
Right.
You have it. Nobody else does.
Exactly. So yeah, I think it's fine to deviate a little bit for whatever, but you have to, I think, stay on theme, stay on point, and it does help with the editing because less babies to kill if you're going along and you're on theme for that entire process. Less babies to kill at the end of it, and especially in something that's longer like this. The first one was about 110, 105,000 words somewhere there, and this one's 130, so a little longer, and this one a little more in depth, so a little more editing to do in this second one, especially the second one's on. Now you're on a timeline. The first one, you're not on a timeline.
Right.
You're just going to get it as like good as you can get it.
Right.
And then that's what I
Now
did.
publishers want their next book.
Exactly. Now you're on a timeline. You're boom. Now you got to do it on the timeline. But I was lucky with that first one in that I got to that point where I'm like, okay, if I work on this for another year, another 2 years, another 3 years, it'll get better. But it'll get better by like that much. It's time to get this to the professionals in New York. And so I think a lot of people, some of the best books ever written are probably on someone's hard drive or next to their bed because they never sent it in. They never talked to an agent, which is typically what most people do first, is find that agent who then shop it around because they know what publishers are looking for, what genres or that sort of thing. So, so I didn't do any of that. I got extremely, extremely fortunate in a lot of respects.
Yeah, I heard about that on Jocko's podcast.
Yeah, I got the door open for me by Brad Thor, and when we first talked, he said, as a thank you for what you did. We had a mutual friend. He's like, I'll probably thinking that I would never write a book. How many people tell you they're going to write a book and don't? Probably a lot more than
especially someone who hasn't really done anything
Who
else.
is this guy?
It's not like you were writing for the paper for 5 years or 20 years.
Exactly. And, but I think when we first talked, it was kind of like an interview.
Yeah.
And then I talked to him just like I'm talking to you and told him about my mom being a librarian and loving this genre. And I could name all these authors and knew all these stories.
I can count 100 people that said the same thing but haven't produced anything.
Yeah. Good point. So I think he felt very, very safe saying, hey, I'll introduce you to my publisher if you write a book. And then but he also said, don't call me back during this process. Like, I'm not going to help you write a chapter. I'm not going to give you any advice. But when do you think you'll be done? And I said, a year from today. And he said, okay. And then so I called him back a year later to the day and said, do you remember me? And he said, yep. And I said, well, it's done. And he was so awesome. He said, well, is it really done? Or is it the best it can possibly be? And I said, no, I could probably work on it for a little longer and edit it and reread it and keep making it better. And he said, okay, call me back when it's as good as you can possibly make it. And so I spent another 4 months on it, just reading it and going back over and working on it and tweaking it. And called him back 4 months later and said, okay, it is now as good as I can possibly make it. And he said, all right, I'll let New York know it's coming.
So I've been in the position where I have it done, and it's like you said, that 4 months you went back. What was the level of improvement from that to at the end of the 4 months?
20%.
It's hard to put a figure on anything, especially for me, not being a numbers person. But it was significantly better, enough where I was proud to send in the final one. I would not have been, I guess, as proud to send in. I knew it needed some work. I guess that's the best way to put it. Like, I know I can make it better and by an amount that makes it different and it's significant. I can make it significantly better if I work on it for a few more months here and spend some more time with it and sleep on it and reread it and ask questions and does this flow and do all that. And so that's kind of what I did for the next few months.
Because I've been in the position where it's due, so I produce it and it's out. But really needed that extra, like, to use your analogy, like 4 months more to get there. And then I've been where I've taken the 4 months, and the difference between that, what I think is done, and then what's really done, I think is substantial for me. It's been major, not just a little. It's like it goes from a movie, let's say, where people are like, "Oh, cool, that's pretty cool. There's some cool shots in it," to there's just people's attention spans are so short, it seems, nowadays. And the final version that I'll come out with nowadays, it seems like it never lets them go long enough that they can put it down till it's over.
Yeah, that's what you need. And we talk about it as a book. You got to want at the end of that one chapter, you have to have them wanting to start the next one.
Yeah.
And then when you end the book, you have to want to get to that next book in the series. So that's the real trick there. But as I go into this kind of schedule where I have to get one a year every year. Right. Now it becomes a little more tricky. I don't have that time just to take a breath and sit on it. And,
deadlines. Deadlines kill me.
Yeah.
Brian comes along. He's like, well,
a lot of people in the creative space that
you've got
I've seen
2 weeks. Bullets, sweating instantly.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah, now I'm in this year-long thing. And luckily, this one I started writing before I even submitted the first novel, though. So this one's been in the works for a while because there are too many stories of people that wrote a first book that didn't take off. Right. And then they wrote a second one, and that's the one that hit. And John Grisham will be the one that most listeners will be familiar with in that he wrote A Time to Kill, which I think is his best novel. Arguably, I think it is. Yeah. And then he couldn't give that thing away. Actually, he had a bunch of first editions of it, and he just threw them in the dumpster outside his law office. And then he wrote The Firm. And the Firm's the one that takes off. Tom Cruise is in the movie. And now we've had a Grisham novel every year since. So we wouldn't have had The Client. We wouldn't have Pelican Brief. We wouldn't have any of those Runaway Jury. We wouldn't have any of those great stories had he just said, this first one doesn't sell.
I've read all of those as well. Like, I've read a lot of books. But I do like, if you were to ask me my favorite book, though, of all time, it might disappoint some people. Favorite books, I would say.
Is this of all books, or is this fiction?
Just all books in general. I mean,
don't tease us.
I would say fiction, nonfiction. I would have to split those up into 2 different categories. I'd say fiction-wise, though. I mean, for books that gave me a thorough, it's so tough, but I would have to say maybe it was a time in my life, but I've really enjoyed all genres. It's like with music. I just like all music.
Yeah.
But I would say, for some reason, I just loved Harry Potter.
No way.
It just...
Well, I haven't read it, so I can't... So my kids have read it.
And some people hate it, they especially if it's steeped in the kind of genre that you're in, an action thriller type thing. But, yeah, for me, I don't know. I mean, I just kind of like all books. But I would say
I should have brought my favorite book. I actually need to... I'll gift it to you because it's my most gifted book.
Yeah.
And it's called Once an Eagle by Anton Meyer. And it was written in 1968. And essentially it's an anti-war novel at heart, but it's historical fiction. And it follows 2 people from right before World War I up to Vietnam. And one of them is an officer the entire time. Yeah. The other one is enlisted, gets a battlefield commission in World War I. And then they move through this time between World War I and World War II, up through World War II, post-war years, and the political animal, the officer without the battlefield experience, without the enlisted experience, is always one step ahead of Sam Damon, who's the protagonist of the story. And it's an amazing read, and there's one line in it though that stands out to me that I write about when I gift it to somebody. And typically I do this to my junior officers or senior enlisted guys, and I'd gift them this book, and I'd have a letter in the front. And in that letter, I'd explain why I'm giving this to them. And then I say at the end, there's a sealed envelope at the back of this book. And that's for you, if you finish the book, to then read that. And that's my take on what you just read, because this is really a case study in leadership. It's historical fiction, but it's a case study in leadership.
That's how you give someone a book.
Yeah.
And, it's a little involved, and it's and it means a lot to me. And so I but anyway, there's Sam Damon is talking to his son at one point in the novel, and he says, you can't help what you were born, and you may not have much to say about where you die, but you can and you should live the days in between as a good man. And I thought that really resonated with me. And really, people talk about characters being what you do when no one's watching. And that's, the easy, that's the easy kind of description or definition. But I thought that really spoke to character for me, is to live a life like that. So that's my favorite. That's my number one book of all time. And there's a few other ones in there too that I of course love, the Ayn Rand novels, and then Winds of War, War and Remembrance by Herman Wouk, who just passed away at 100. A few days.
I got some more books to read now.
A few days shy of his 104th birthday. Jeez. It was amazing. But he wrote The Caine Mutiny as well, which people know. There's the movie with Humphrey Bogart, and then the Winds of War and War and Remembrance were a miniseries in the early 80s, maybe in the mid 80s, but somewhere in there. With Robert Mitchum, and just amazing. But what's more historical fiction, those two, and they really take you up to Pearl Harbor, and then Pearl Harbor onward for War and Remembrance. So it's a great way for people to learn about that part in history in a way that you're living it through different characters that are different at different parts really of the military, on the home front, overseas,
Interesting.
kind of in the United States, but you're living this time through all these different perspectives, and it's just an amazing 2 books. So highly recommend those.
I would say nonfiction wise, 2 books that have probably, been the most impactful for me. Number 1 book, I got this book when I was 16, I think, is Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl.
Oh yeah, I've read that one.
So I read that
That's
book.
incredible.
I don't know why. Again, I think sometimes these things have to do with the time of in your life that you receive them or you come across them.
Sure.
Right.
Everybody should read that one.
And I think I've probably read that book 50 times.
Yeah. It's very readable in that it's not daunting.
Exactly.
When I give you Once an Eagle, you'll look at this thing and be like, oh man,
are you kidding me?
Exactly. Luckily, you can use it as a weapon or a doorstop, so it has multiple uses.
Right.
But you're chewing on all those books that I mentioned. They're all thick. They all take some commitment. But that one you can get through, in a day for sure.
Yeah, and I don't know why, but there are certain parts of it that just resonated, and then I've read it many times because it's sort of like a daily reminder of certain things to recognize that life is tragic and that it can be a whole lot worse than it is right now.
Oh yeah.
And the depth to which humanity can do dark and evil things, that with that is the opposite of how good human beings can be. But
that light, even in the darkness, there's a little bit of light.
And I think Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
Okay, I have not read that.
I've read that, I don't know, 50 times, 100 times, just for some certain chapters, sections. I'll just reread it over and over again. There's one on pride.
Chapter 8. I read that a couple times a year.
Nice. I like it. I will read it.
You can just Google Chapter 8 Mere Christianity.
Okay, it'll pop up.
I think, for me, they're just some... And then other super transformative books was Extreme Ownership.
Yeah.
With Jocko. We did a couple podcasts on that too. And
yeah, it's a great one, especially for people that haven't experienced that downrange, and to see it from Jocko's perspective. There's probably no one better to relate that experience and take the lessons from it. And both positive and negative, but even taking the negative and taking the lessons learned and the failures and imparting them to people in a way that they are now positive for the people that are learning. That's what you owe the guys that didn't make it home. But there's nobody better than Jocko to do that.
I think those are just somewhat it's same with Mere Christianity, chapter 8. It's similar to Jocko's book. C.S. Lewis, the way that, and of course he's tackling it from somewhat of a religious perspective, but nonetheless, the principles are true across humanity, regardless of faith. And I think, it really comes at you and causes you to see, how, I guess, that theme of extreme ownership really applies.
Sure.
You can't grow. You can't be anything unless you own it all.
Yeah, it's about taking that accountability to being able to recognize it, to in a lot of cases, put a word to it, like identify it verbally, and that for some reason that just lets you, I don't know, you give it a word,
absolutely,
whatever, and then you can move on from it. For some reason that really helps. So you take accountability for those actions, you learn from it, hopefully become wiser, and move forward, and then share it with other people out there that are within your circle of influence. Which is why podcasts are so great, because you reach so many people.
Yeah.
Your circle of influence isn't just us hanging out, having a drink, whatever, talking like we are, but we'd have the same conversation without however many people are listening, which is significant. Right. But now that circle of influence, like yours, has just grown. It's just exponentially. It's amazing.
A podcast. Let me ask you this: what podcast have you listened to that you felt like was transformative for you?
Ooh, that's a good question. So when did I start my first podcast? I'm thinking you were like number 2.
Really?
I think. Yeah, because I found out about podcasts and I don't know when it was, but when did you start this one?
2014?
February
13th?
Yeah, probably.
2014.
I think, So right around then, so I discovered Joe Rogan first, and I forget how. I was thinking about that on the way down here for some reason. That's very odd. But I was trying to think of the first podcast that I listened to, and I can't remember, but it must have been Joe Rogan, and it must have been one of the ones I scrolled through to find either one of the ones on hunting, so one of the early people he had on about that, so either Remy or somebody, whoever one of his first people were there that he had on, or Jonathan Ward from Icon 4x4 that does the Land Cruisers. So it might have been him. Anyway, somebody I scrolled through and found. But soon after that, I think I didn't know what podcasts were, and I think I just did a search in the podcast thing for hunting, and I think you popped up right away. So you were early. You were like my second podcast I listened to.
Game.
I think I was the one. There was like two other Nella came out like 3 weeks before me or something.
Oh, I didn't see him. It definitely wasn't him first. I definitely gritty.
I got it early. It
was awesome. Yeah, because the gritty thing, of course, stood out. To me, so you're like, boom. What is this? And then the podcasts were great, and of course, so the first time I almost met you. So this is kind of crazy.
Oh, really?
I was driving my daughter to camp in Wyoming. So I can't remember if I was still in the Navy or if I had just gotten out. I forget the exact year, either 2016 or 2015. But Total Archery Challenge. So we're driving up here from San Diego to go to Total Archery Challenge for the first time, meeting Barklow up here to shoot and all that. And so we've been listening to you on the way up. And we get in kind of a little bit later because dark, because we're driving from San Diego. And we get up here and we're in line to check in. And then you arrived late also, and I think you're with Mountain Ops guys. I think
maybe,
and so you're checking in, and I see, and I just heard you on the podcast, so I wanted to be like, hey, but then I'm like, oh, that's weird. that's crazy. So I'm not going to say anything. But I was to my daughter, I'm like, hey, that's who we're just listening to. So that was pretty cool. But hunting podcasts were the ones that I really gravitated to right off the bat, and of course Joe, because he had so many different guests. But I was just listening to the ones that interested me, of course, and a lot of those were the hunting ones. So early in.
It's funny. I saw Jocko up there at the TAC this last week, but I was like, I didn't want to be the guy that was like, hey, come over. So I didn't introduce myself or say.
Well, next time I'll introduce you, because I'm going to both. It's during a time in New York where they have this thing called Thriller Fest, which is thriller authors, it's publishers, it's agents, it's fans, it's panels. It's a really cool event.
Shot show
and
for
it's
thriller authors.
Exactly. And it's every year right at the same time as Total Archery Challenge in Utah. But this next book number 3, has a huge archery component to it, bow hunting and archery. So it's first as like a therapy, and then as the action of the climactic scene. So I don't want to, but anyway, so it's the book I've wanted to write since 6th grade, when I first read Most Dangerous Game by Richard Connell, written in 1923. And he back then was exploring this hunter versus hunted and juxtaposing what a lot of the books out there at the time, a lot of people writing were talking about going on these African hunts, and they're hunting the animals. And so he took that, he was like one of the first people to flip it and talk about the hunting of man. And then it became the basis for tons of movies and books going forward. But when I was in 6th grade reading that, I'm like, someday I'm going to write a modern rendition of this. So book number 3, it takes the same characters from books 1 and 2 and takes this theme of the hunting of man, the dark side of man, exploring that through the eyes of somebody who's been both in combat and then now is moving on and making a decision about what he's going to do next in life. So I've always wanted to do it. It's with the modern geopolitical backdrop, but that's the theme. But point being, it's a great excuse to go to Total Archery Challenge, both here in Utah and in Montana. So I'll be at both of those next year. So I'm super fired up, which also means I need to get back on my game on the archery front. I need to get out there and really put in the time this year, because I got to go out there and hit what I'm aiming at.
It is fun. Yeah. There's just a few people that if I were to, I always feel, I don't want to meet him under those certain circumstances, where it's like,
you want to meet him under a controlled circumstance.
Well, where you can actually have a conversation, right? Not one where it's just like, it's
meet him at the grocery store out in the wild. It's weird.
I don't know, but I would say podcasts for me that were transformative were, and not really podcasts. Dave Ramsey. I listened to him on the radio show about the Total Money Makeover and Financial Peace University, and that definitely shaped my my life, changed my life, because that's when I decided to get out of debt and did the debt snowball and did all these things to and I've been out of debt for I don't know how many years now.
Before you started the podcast,
maybe 8-9 years, where and that shaped me there. I'd say like barbell shrugged early on because you were into CrossFit pretty early.
I love barbell shrugged.
I was. You wouldn't know it today, but yes, I was an early. I remember the first time I did it. I was like, somebody emailed me about it.
You were weird.
Like 2003 maybe.
Yeah,
and I like got on this
that's
thing. I saw this website, and I'm like, I just do like 5 deadlifts, five times, and then that's it. And then I go to, and I scrolled a little bit down. I'm like, what is this? A buddy said, hey, check this out. Yeah. The guy that started Paleo Treats, Nick Hawks.
Oh, yeah.
So he emails me and says, you got to check this out. We get our first platoon together. And I checked it out. I'm like, dude, that was just weird. What? I don't understand what I'm supposed to. So I didn't get it right off the bat.
Yeah, me either.
So then I took a little bit of a break, went back to, 3 sets, 7 to 10, then run as fast as you can. And then, but then I really dove in Ramadi, Iraq, 2005, 2006. So then I just totally devoted myself to it.
Right.
And then after that deployment, I went to a language school. So I was in Monterey, California for 6 months, and they wanted me to learn French of all things.
That's
They wanted
right.
to send me to North Africa, West Africa, and I did go, but I had a translator the whole time, so I never, so I've forgotten everything. So that is one of the tax dollars that didn't really work out for everybody. But I got into it big time then. And so now you're at a regular Globo gym for the first. I go down the hill from the military thing. So I wanted to get as far away from the military as possible. So I went down to the local community center, which is awesome there. And, there's no CrossFit equipment. There's no kettlebells
plates.
yet. There's no kettlebells yet. No bumper plates, none of that. And I'm throwing these things around. I'm using, I'm just, people
For
were
time.
Like, what are you doing? Like, I looked like a crazy person.
Right.
But I got in some amazing shape, both in Iraq and then with that time in Monterey, just knocking out the CrossFit.
Yeah.
And then I'd throw in swimming and trail running also, just on my own because I grew up doing that stuff and I wanted to see if I could do a triathlon just doing CrossFit and swimming. So I stopped the running for a bit and didn't do any biking. And I always wanted to do the Escape from Alcatraz triathlon. Yeah. So I just had there, have to see the movie, whatever else. So I wanted to do that. And so I signed up for it. And I'd been doing CrossFit exclusively and swimming for a few months and went up there and jumped in. Boom, you jump off a ferry to start and swam in. Disgusting water, by the way, as you get in. They plan it for like a slack tie type thing, so you're not drawn out into the gate. But you get in towards the shore, and it's just, it's awful. But anyway, got out of there. I'm like, oh, man, I came out way ahead of where I thought I was going to be. This is awesome. And then ran to the bike. And then the bike caused me some problems that CrossFit did not prepare me for the bike. And in fact, I'd rented a bike the day before and I didn't realize that things had changed over the last, 15 years since I'd ridden.
Since I'd ridden
a 10 speed. It's not, I jump on it and I'm looking for how do you shift these things? I'm like, what on earth? And I'm doing circles at the bottom of the first hill and someone from the crowd yells, you push in on the brake.
Side,
I had no idea you pushed in on brakes. So I did. I'm like, oh, thanks. And so that one hurt me. But then I got back and then knocked out the run. Run was great. But the point being, CrossFit did prepare me to jump off a boat, swim to shore, move to a bike. Unfortunately, I had to ride that bike.
Like, how would that work out for you? Because, I experimented too with CrossFit being just the sole thing I did for just a general physical preparedness for fitness. And it made me serviceable in just about everything I wanted to do. But I suffered when it came to long runs or packs for days and days and days.
Well, we saw that in the games when they did that at Pendleton. When you did that run, you see those guys hurting.
That's where I was like, okay, my day to day, my hour, my 7-minute WODs and 15, 12-minute WODs.
Right.
I was strong and I was fit and I could do it, but it was painful when I went on like a week-long backpack trip and I was covering 17 miles, 12 miles a day and covering ground. You need to kind of do that sport-specific activity if you're really going to feel good and excel. I was able to do it, but definitely that sport-specific element added into your CrossFit routine, I think, is the way to go.
Right. Well, when I first got back here to Park City, we drove from San Diego. We pull in, we get in the middle of the night, we unpack everything, and the next day we get up and go to the grocery store. And we got out of the car up there, and we look around. We're like, oh my gosh, look! We come from San Diego. We thought exactly. We're like, look at this. Oh my god, we thought we were coming from San Diego. We thought we were in pretty good shape, not bad. And we got there, and we're like, oh my gosh, look at these people. They're
50-year-old moms,
just like
super jacked,
just amazing,
running trails.
So
Soccer moms crush.
I got to do something. Yeah, I got to step up my game here. So luckily I knew Hobie Darling, who was the former CEO of Skull Candy and lives up there. I've known him for years. Awesome guy, but he's programming with a group of guys up there, like eight of us.
You're saying
he's
a beast.
He's a monster. These guys are animals. All these guys that I work out with up there. Well, I haven't been for a few months. So guys, if you're listening, I'm not trying to make it seem like I'm still there. I will be back though. But yeah, he has this programming that's insane. Cool. And I knew what he was going to do before I showed up that first morning. But I'm like, I need to work up. I need to get to where I can then jump in. And he's like, nope, come down. So showed up and jumped right in. And that's the best way to do it, of course, for any of these things. And then we started knocking it out. But it's really like 3 or 4 what you think of as CrossFit workouts with these runs, with these swims, trail running, whatever else. These guys are animals.
There's something powerful about doing those workouts in a group.
Oh yeah,
it's a team. I'll work out a lot by myself, and I'm easily motivated to do that, but I don't push myself quite the same in general as I do when I'm with a group. Without a doubt,
I may take an extra breath or two when I'm on my own.
Yeah,
but with those guys, I mean, they're cheering you on. It's a team, and we all meet there in the mornings and get after it together, and everybody supports each other, and it's awesome. It's a great group of guys.
The only CrossFit gym I've been to since I moved here is Chris's.
Yeah,
Spieler's
so
up
great.
there in Park City, and I just miss the group workout thing. Yep. Now and then, I'll get a little group downstairs together here in the building, and we'll do it. But generally, I miss it.
Yeah. No, that community is a huge part of it.
Yeah.
And being with good people, and that's a key part too. I mean, it can be motivating, but if you don't like them, you're not going to go back.
I got into it sort of simultaneously with listening to the podcast, because I listened to Barbell Shrugged, and they were interviewing like Rich Froning and different people early on. And this is right when podcasts for me were kind of newish, and I'm like, and it's sort of just led the way into paleo and completely changed my ideas on fitness. Just 100%, just completely flipped my world around.
Yeah.
And when I first started saying, I'm kind of going to go more paleo, less breads and gluten, and people freaked, like you were saying about going to the gym, people freaking out. Yeah. People were freaking out. I also, when I was getting out of debt and I sold my fancy truck and I bought a Dodge Neon for $700 that was rusted from bumper to bumper, people freaked out about that too.
Brian looked like he had lost his mind.
Yeah.
And
so I get it.
But those were transformative. Those podcasts is where I learned a lot.
Interesting.
And now, I never really listen to Barbell Shrugged anymore. I don't really do anything with Dave Ramsey anymore. And I think that the same cycle somewhat with my podcast too. People come on, they learned a lot about archery. They learned a lot about backcountry hunting. They maybe learned about fitness or whatever. Then they learn it all, right? Wow. And I think in some ways they move on to something else, a different podcast or different. I've done that throughout my life, but I still have a soft spot for how that show impacted me at that time.
Got it.
And always respect and am thankful for that. Yeah. And I hope that's what I want.
No, it's great because you feel like you're part of the conversation. That's the power of podcasts. Mm-hmm. It's that you feel like you're here, like I did. But when I was still in the military and discovered podcasts, I was getting ready to get out and discovered podcasts. And then I really stopped listening to music, and it was just podcasts from then on out. But I felt like I was part of that conversation. Yeah. Which is why when people see you probably at Total Archery Challenge, they walk up like they know you. Yeah. Because they feel like they've had all these conversations with you. Yeah. You're an active participant in that. You're not just it's different than just listening to music and you're taking it in, or listening to something and just taking it in. Like even an audiobook, you're taking it in. You feel, and you're in a podcast, you're actively engaged in that conversation for whatever reason. And you don't feel that way with an audiobook, and you don't feel that way with music. I don't think. Maybe you can if you're a musician or something, but I feel like I'm part of these conversations, which is, I think it's the power of podcast.
Yeah, I would say that, in the audiobook genre, I don't feel like I'm necessarily part of a conversation, but man, I do love audiobooks.
Oh, people love audiobooks. It's the fastest growing part of publishing now. And what I didn't know at the outset is that people that are narrators bring a whole fan base with them. People will follow that. And I had no idea.
Like George Goodall and Vince Flynn,
I'm nice. Yeah, I never listened to books. I always read. Mm-hmm. And I still really just read. And I'll do audiobooks if I need to do them for a reason. Yeah. But I love just the act of reading and being actively engaged in reading. But what I didn't know is that I didn't know anything about the audio side
I can really
of the house.
appreciate the performance of a reader.
Yeah, exactly. And they bring these audiences, and I'm very lucky that I chose Ray Porter because
how'd you get him?
Well, Simon & Schuster, they emailed me one afternoon and said, "Hey, a little short notice, but I need you to approve this narrator." I was like, "Oh, okay." So I clicked on it and listened, and I was like, "Ooh, that does not sound right." It sounded like Santa Claus, you know.
Right.
It's not really, it wasn't right. I'm like, can I choose somebody else? And they said, "Yeah, just let us know in the next couple hours." And I was like, "Oh." I'd never listened to an audiobook.
Right.
Oh,
and I was like, "Oh man." So I started sampling. You know, you can do that sample thing. I'm like, nope. And then hit out Ray Porter and was like, do it again. Listen to another book that he did real quick, just a sniffle. Okay. And then I said, well, how about this guy, Ray Porter? And they said, okay, we'll reach out and see if he wants to do it. And luckily he said yes. And I had no idea that he was going to bring this whole entire fan base of audiobook people to my first novel.
Wow.
So I feel so lucky that one, that I chose him, and two, that he said yes, and that he's such a great guy. So the audiobook part is fascinating, and it's the fastest growing section of publishing.
Have you ever thought about reading your books? Because you've got a great voice.
Oh, I don't think so. I cannot listen to myself. It's
you've
very
got a
hard.
Great voice.
I
can listen to you all day.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But I can't. It's very hard for me to listen.
Some people,
You know who?
like Jocko can read his own.
Right.
Yeah,
That's what I was
easy.
going to say.
Yeah.
Jocko's reading
He can
his
read
own
my
book.
books. I like
he
him.
almost
I
has
think I can afford him now
because he's got such a Cro-Magnon
he's got it.
everything.
Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman.
Does he read his
books.
own?
He reads his own book. Malcolm Gladwell, he reads his own books.
There's something to be said about an author reading their own book, particularly if it is nonfiction, I think.
Private Blueprint. What's his face?
Mark Sisson.
Yeah.
Jocko, he'll read, and he makes you feel.
You should listen to that voice.
Yeah. It's it can be a little dark when you're reading a dark book.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But once again, people are drawn to
But
it.
you're sucked in.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. It's amazing. But no, I would leave that to the professionals. There are certain things that I want the professionals to handle, and audio reading is one of them. So whoever the best guy is, do that. And so the first book was optioned for a film, and we can't talk about who did it yet. They haven't announced it officially, but people kept asking me, do you want to write for it? Do you want to write the screenplay? And I was like, I want the best screenwriter that they can find, to adapt it. That's get the best. Everybody needs just make that the professionals.
Jumping into another medium, so taxing. It's so hard, and there's such a steep learning curve.
Yeah. And also, you want to even for the marketing piece, you want to be able to say that this so and so did this. It could be who directed it, who starred in it, who did this, who's people that are in the know, who wrote it. Oh, interesting.
Chris Pratt's in it. I'll watch it.
That's good.
It's
the only one.
It's such an interesting thing, and I did read that, there's a potential for a movie. From the books.
So we'll see. But things can always derail the morning of filming. So I'm keeping my expectations extremely low.
Yeah.
If it happens, wonderful. If not, that's okay too.
And is this sort of are the talks around movie or TV?
So I don't know what I'm allowed to say. But they explored both, and they chose one at this point. But they could flip back. Who knows? I don't know. And it could already be derailed.
How cool
at this
is
point.
that,
Who
though?
knows? Very
How cool is that?
Very cool.
So for people that are listening, how that haven't read the book, I want them to understand how good the book is. How has it been received?
Yeah, so it's I've been told it's very difficult to break in as a thriller author, and that this one has done that. So I didn't pay attention to these odds beforehand, kind of like with Buds. I thought, 80% attrition. Well, that's what I want to do. I want to be in that 20%, and of course I'll be in that 20%.
Right.
Why wouldn't I be? So I did. That's all the thought I gave. It's hard. I want to do that. I'm going to train for it. Okay. Bam. That's it. So same thing with this. Oh, it's very difficult. Well, okay. That's fine. I'll just do that.
Execute.
And then I'm going to do it, and then it's going to get picked up by Simon & Schuster.
If it wasn't hard,
it's going to
get. Want to do it?
Yeah,
that's how hunting is,
and it's how military was a calling, and writing is a calling. Both those things are things that I've wanted to do since I was a little kid, and I felt this calling to do them both. I haven't really felt a calling to do anything else. Hunting is just a part of me. That's not really a calling. That's just a part of me. That's natural. It's like there's no choice. Like, I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
But these things are choices. It's a choice to join the military. It's a choice to write, and those are callings. And so I feel very fortunate that I found these two callings early on, and that for whatever reason I did one and am doing the other. So I feel very, very fortunate in that respect.
I have some close friends and even family members that want to be authors, that want to write, but it's, man, I got to say, it's so much easier said than done.
Stephen King
luckily
says
I didn't
how he
think about
writes is he sits down at his typewriter, he cuts his wrist, and he bleeds on the paper.
Yeah, that's one way.
It sounds a little. I feel like that's a good barrier to entry for most folks.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you spend too much time thinking about those odds, that's the point of that, is that it can dissuade you. And the same looks that I got when I told people I wanted to be a SEAL are the same looks I got when I told people I was going to write. They're like, oh, that's nice. Kind of like, he'll grow out of it.
Right.
Even if they're like placating you almost, which made me, I didn't really, I guess it could make me mad, I guess, but it was kind of like, I don't know, I use it as fuel.
Yeah.
I guess.
No, I hear you. I can remember from being, ever since I got a video camera when I was like 12, I started making movies. And I remember, making this, and you're pretty limited on gear back then.
I was going to ask, did you have the one that had the strap that
had
recorded down here?
Yeah,
and then there was that one that came out that was kind of maroon.
It was a VHS.
VHS tape going. We had the beta one.
Yeah.
I had a beta recorder.
We had a beta as well.
And I understand the quality
not
was
a
better
recorder,
on that.
but like a view.
Yeah, you had the camera, and then you had the shoulder strap, and the tape was down here.
And I remember getting VHS 8, right? Was it called that? Something like that?
Yeah, the 8 something, or the smaller ones.
Yeah, the smaller ones. And I remember thinking,
wow.
Holy crap.
Yeah.
But the edit process was me having three different VHS players.
Oh, wow.
And then manually putting this one in, playing it to the TV, and having this one record over.
Like you do with a tape.
Yeah, from tape to tape.
Yeah.
Yep.
And mixing like my voiceover
Nice.
over the top of my
So you
shots.
felt a calling to do this early on.
And then I remember I served a mission for my church in Japan, and I made a bunch of movies. Like, we would get together, a bunch of guys, and we would make some samurai or some themed actual movie.
I only have one memory of this, one of those films that you sent home, where a man's brother was pushed off of something, and for the action scene, they had a little paper man. You could see someone's
That's
fingers.
awesome.
Hey,
Yeah,
dude.
you start somewhere.
It was representative.
Yeah, you're building that foundation.
Yeah.
And
That was our special effect.
Love it.
The crying special effect was great. They had a paper towel that they put up to their eyes like they were wiping it and squeeze.
It was sort of a spoof mockery type video. But I remember making movies from, I did a movie in college that was a Love Potion number 9. It was a marketing course I was in. Still, we didn't have crap for gear back then. And because this was 96.
Okay.
And I remember I called up my now wife, but at the time my girlfriend. I'm like, hey, I have a project due tomorrow, because that's usually how I operate. Professor wants it tomorrow. We've had all semester to work on it, but it's due tomorrow. I'm starting tonight. Can you show up at the museum here, the art exhibit? I got this idea. Dress super hot. She's like,
Okay.
Okay.
Is this a trick?
She shows up in this slinky hot dress, and then I just like, okay, this is what we're doing, and put together this movie, and where she can't resist me because of the love potion.
Yeah, well, she obviously wasn't acting.
Totally. So
made that easy on her.
I put the potion on. I'm like Bond, 007 kind of themed shots, and I show up at this art exhibit, and she's there, and then she kind of sees me, and then she can't resist me. It was like my fantasy. And she comes over, and she's like super hot and does her thing, and then it's this ad about how, Love Potion number 9, which is just a spoof of the cologne. It was an ad for cologne. And my professor was just head over heels over it, showed it to every class that he had, was talking about all the elements that made it such a good piece. And I'm like, that was all instinctive, and I made it up on the fly the night before. It was
there you go.
And but I feel like all of that just sort of was always somewhat natural.
Yeah, it was a part of you. You wanted to do it from early on and laid the foundations
and
for it.
I can remember watching old Primos hunting films and stuff and thinking, dude, I want to do hunting videos. Nice. And thinking how silly it was at the time. To a degree, but that's what I wanted to do.
The podcast was simply, Brian wanted to make hunting films, but he wanted a base to sell them to. So we started the podcast, and the podcast got away from him. Didn't make film for like 2 years.
Well, it's true. There's to an extent, I never planned on it actually making any money.
Yeah.
I wanted to make a video just because I creatively wanted to make film.
Yeah.
And every year after I finished a hunt with my buddies, I would make a film.
For them?
Yep. And we'd all have a post elk hunting
little party or something.
I'm sure your wives
we get together.
Loved
it. They were bored out of their mind. And we'd sit down and we'd all barbecue and eat the elk we harvested. Yeah. And we'd have a bunch of buddies there, and then we'd sit down and we'd watch the film. And I would make a book of the hunt with stills and articles. And I wrote stories. Mm-hmm. And then I'd give each of the guys a book. And I did that. We did about 4 years or so in a row. And it was just and I'd been making videos before that, but it was getting more and more serious about it. And then I was like, I'd like to actually try to make one and put it in some sort of film festival. And came up with Gritty Bowman and made a film and put it in the festival. And then I was like, people liked it. And I thought, and I'd wondered why there wasn't more hunting podcasts. There wasn't really any at the time. You had J. Scott Outdoors, and
I couldn't think of any off the top of my head.
And there was a couple that just were real minor. And I was like, you know what? I have the gear and the equipment, and I like to have a conversation. I'm going to see if some guys will sit down and if I interview. And it was it was kind of like today. I just want to put a headset on you and kind of ask you questions and then learn from your perspective.
Yeah. Well, I went back to that one you guys did on sleeping bags early on a few years ago, and I was going back like, okay, what did they say? What is that one? I was taking notes. Of course, I'm driving when I'm listening to most of these things, so, but yeah, that was an awesome one. And they've all been great,
But I really feel like listening. Those conversations were, and then like Brent said, it just sort of just picked up momentum.
Yeah, sometimes life's like that.
And you were talking about being blessed, just with Brad Thor and things like that. And, I had different things pan out, and I remember being at the Western Hunt Expo, and Joe Rogan was there with Cam, and Cam's like standing there, and they come walking by, and I'm doing live podcasts at the Hunt Expo, which by the way scared the hell out of me. I mean, I don't know anybody. I'm just a guy, a regular Joe that's been hunting. I'm not an expert, and I never have tried to portray myself as one. I'm a person who wants to learn, and you can learn along with me as I talk to people about their craft.
And it's very appealing to people approaching it that way as well.
Yeah, and I fancy myself more of an interviewer or an inquisitive person than the knowledgeable person, the expert, And I sat down, and I remember sitting there going, being really nervous to interview people. They just know so much more than me. But I was like, my role is not to know the answers. It's to try to just be real.
Sure.
And so I remember interviewing, and it was a podcast every hour, just live. No one had done that, by the way. No one had posted up at a show and just sat down with headsets and actually had conversations, and next guy.
14, 15 episodes in 2 or 3 days.
Yeah, I would walk away with about 8 a day over a 3-day week and 24 shows. It was like
awesome.
And then you had to edit them, and I was really slow with that. And it was brutal, but I remember Rogan was there, and it's like, hey, it was scary.
Did he go on?
Somewhat, because I wasn't. Yeah. There's only a few people that had me be that made me feel that were I wouldn't say where I was struck or felt just a little lost for words. Rogan's was one of those people for sure. I'd say Ranella was another one.
Spieler.
I've never really talked to Ranella.
I remember when you ran into Spieler out in the wild.
I will say that it was early on too, and I was a little nervous with Chris because he'd been sort of an idol in a way.
It was at TAC, and Brian's just stops.
I didn't say hi. I didn't say hi. I'm like that. I'm not going to say hi to Jocko. I'm not going to say hi. I'm not going to say hi. In general,
he's great. Chris Spieler's great.
Unless someone helps with that introduction, or unless it feels right.
Right.
But I sat down with Cam and Joe Rogan. We did a podcast, and overnight the podcast like grew 100-fold.
Oh, that's awesome.
And I had 50 shows in the can that I worked hard to produce.
Right.
But it was that exposure that just took it to a whole level overnight. Right. And then from that, I quit my job shortly after that. And
nice.
You can just kind of tie it right back to that little window of...
Yeah, and if you decided not to go or like...
which I almost talked myself out of so many times.
Got to drive there.
Or not to talk to him or ask him if he'll be on the show.
Yeah.
I mean, what's the worst, though? He's going to say no.
Yeah,
exactly. And so, and it turned out to be, major blessing.
Yeah, fairly transformative. That's amazing.
So, I don't know. It's a...
That was a scary podcast.
It was.
It was the whole... Well... Where we're at is in the middle of two giant, what's the word I'm thinking of? Not hallways, aisles. People are going by constantly, and people are walking by in front of the cameras. So you're trying to like wave people off not to walk in front of the cameras because people just don't realize you're
kind of a
filming
circus.
anything.
But it was really neat. It was it's a combination of hard work, innovativeness, and like planning, and then having fortunate circumstances.
Yeah,
luck.
we got to see those opportunities as they emerge, and then figure out how to adapt and take advantage of them moving forward.
I want to ask you one more question, and then I know you got to go. I wanted to ask you, like, how does someone write a good action scene? Because too often when it seems that people can tell a story, but when it gets to the part where there's action, it's either too confusing to follow, or it's too void of descriptions and context to make it exciting.
Yeah,
it's especially in the written word, because you can show so much in a film,
right?
But and you can't drag out like a 3-sentence or 3-paragraph section how he got punched.
Right.
Like you got to get on with the next punch.
Yeah.
So how do you do that?
So what I want to do is I want it to it has to be, well, obviously it has to be exciting. It has to be thrilling. It has to be realistic. And I'll reach out to experts that know a lot more than I do in certain things. Like I love knives. I've done some training with knives, but there are people out there that know a lot more than I do about this. Okay. So like for this book in particular, for a scene, I reached out to a guy that lives and breathes essentially combatives and knives. And, and for the third one,
what a cool job
too. And I have these videos. So he took videos and sent them to me. So I said, this is what I want to do. Here's kind of my thing. This is what he has available. He's got his weapon. He's got an M4 or MP7 or whatever it is. And, he's got a knife on his plate carrier or wherever it is. So I gave him the parameters and, then I kind of wrote what I wanted to have happen and then said, hey, so what would you do if you come around a corner, weapon gets trapped, and now you're essentially, hand to hand with somebody because you can't get to your weapon. It's a surprise. There's an explosion, blah, blah, blah. Like what would you do? How would you get to that? And then he sent me a video like with the rubber dummy and the whole thing going through it and talking about what you could do. And so I just watched it over and over again and thought through it, asked a few questions, and then turned that into what's here. So it's like almost having a, like you're sculpting something or painting something, having the model up there and you're kind of doing that same type of thing, for like the knife type scene, snipers type stuff, different. But anything that's combatives, like I boxed and I did some jiu-jitsu early on. But I'm definitely not, an expert in those things. I just have a base. I feel very comfortable in that base, but don't want to get in fights today because everybody is now doing some jiu-jitsu and it's crazy. So I will avoid conflict now. But back in the day, you wanted to test yourself, and if you didn't know the person, you were to fight with somebody and they weren't in your jiu-jitsu class, you pretty much know you're gonna
dominate.
But so that's how I do some of those. So some of them I know, the sniper stuff I know very well. Some of the combatives I know where I'm going with it. I know that some of the knife stuff, but I reach out to people that really live and breathe that stuff, so I can get things in there that haven't been done before. So in this one that I'm writing right now, this third one that I'm putting the final touches on, there's some sweet knife stuff in there that I don't think anyone has ever described before. So anyway, it's fun. I love it. But it takes a lot of editing to make sure that it's not too confusing to people or too unrealistic. So it has to have all that stuff. It has to be authentic. But then some people, what they think is authentic, like with the knife stuff or with the gun stuff, unless they're really into it and know that, someone gets shot in the head, like it can It's depending on the caliber, what I call atmospherics of a gunfight. There are things out there that you can't control and you can't duplicate in training, and different angles, weather conditions, whatever else. And, bullet can hit the skull and travel around and come out on the other side. The weird things happen in real life. And many people have been killed by people they thought were already dead. That's the hat happens. So I want to make it so sometimes when, like, especially with the knife stuff, like my mom was like, well, why is he not dead already? Like, well, because it could, it's kind of real life. Like the human body is resilient. Like we have this will to live, this will to fight. And it's very primal. And when it comes down to it and you're fighting for that life, like it's not just like in the movies,
right?
Like it can be very, very.
I know that from
graphic
hunting.
And exactly. You could.
Same thing. I've thought I've killed an animal.
Every hunter, yes.
And you're just like, its will to live is unreal. And the shots in the load, it like the hemorrhaging and the bleeding, and yet it still fights on. And some just fall over.
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, that was 30 seconds, 20 seconds. And then other ones, you're like, same shot, same situation.
Yeah.
Should have fallen over, but lived 5 minutes.
Right.
Or more.
Yep. How many people have that where they think it's down, or even with a very experienced guide? Oh, it's down. Don't need to shoot it again. Start walking up. Boom. Nope. Takes off running. Never happened to anybody.
Always double tap.
Yeah.
If you have an opportunity, double tap.
I know.
I tend to agree.
That actually happened to Lampers and I this year. We're not going to talk about
it. It's happened to, if you hunt, that will probably happen.
And it's happened before, and so that's why it's like, I almost said, just shoot it again.
Yeah.
Just shoot it anyway.
Yeah.
I think it looks so dead, but and then when it jumps up and runs off, you're just like,
not so
I
dead.
could have just put another arrow in it, just to put another arrow in it.
Yep.
I could have, and it really wouldn't have. It wouldn't hurt the meat. It wouldn't do anything. It was 20 yards. It's like, why not?
Yeah. Yeah, no, exactly. And what I'm doing with these novels, you noticed in the first one, not everyone does, but people that come from a hunting background do. They notice the hunting theme in there.
Yeah.
Those little nuggets that are left in there for hunters. Well, the second one goes really into it because I did some research in Mozambique. The character needs a place to essentially learn to live again. The second one, we talked about the first one being a novel of revenge.
Yeah.
This one is a novel of redemption. Yeah. So I call it violent redemption. But he thinks he's dying, so he thinks that's what he's going to do. But until he does, he needs to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And he ends up going to this place and learning to live again. Just like people that go through traumatic experiences kind of need to do that. And my experience is from obviously special operations or whatever, but it can be any traumatic experience in life. You learn to live again. And if you're making a transition of some sort, then you're finding that next purpose. You're finding that next mission. So as part of this journey, James Reese, the protagonist, needs to learn to live again and needs to find his next mission. And he finds that in the wilds of Mozambique, where I went to do a hunt and to learn and bring some of that local flavor to these pages. But the intent from the beginning has always been to, yes, it's a political thriller. You're grabbing a thriller from the shelf, but it's popular fiction. And if I can help influence or educate about conservation, about hunting, then people that pull this political thriller from the shelves are also getting an education in conservation and hunting, particularly in this book and with the third one that I'm just finishing up. So it's I don't think I don't know who's done anything like that before, but I wanted to, because it's so important to me, to my family, but being out there together in the wilderness, doing something that's so primal, bringing that meat home, talking about it again around the table, reliving that experience together. Who got this? My daughter, my wife, where were we? Where was it from? How did we prepare it this time? That's so important to us and who we are, that it's just natural that it comes across in the pages of the novel anyway. So it's not something that I actively have to try to do. I thought about it, but it was just very natural to happen anyway, just because it's just such a part of who I am, and so much of me ends up in these pages.
Well, it seems like nowadays more than ever, people want authenticity. They want real, and I feel like that's what that provides. That sort of authentic connection.
Yeah, I wouldn't know how to do anything else. So it's like, it's very natural for me, because I wouldn't know how to do any other way. And I guess that comes across. But emotions and the feelings that the protagonist feels, or things that I felt. And then the gear that I talk about is stuff that I use, or in some cases it's too expensive and it's I want to use it someday, like an M200 intervention strike tack.
Right.
But some of those things like that. But it's all stuff that's a part of me, like the knives, and I have relationships with people whose products I use in there, the knives or guns or ammo or whatever. Like I know the people behind it that started it, that crafted them, and that all ends up in the pages as well.
Well, there are certain books or movies, movies are especially guilty of this. When I see things that are unrealistic, that are like, man, that can't be done, or when I watch things that sort of like the Hunger Games, and I see how Katniss shoots a bow and the bow set up, and you're like,
how about the cake maker makes himself look like a tree? PETA, you remember that?
Yeah.
Baker's boy, he just frostings himself up and then hides against a tree.
Yeah, like all I'm saying is that there are things that I'll watch where I'm like, you kind of lose me, because now it's not authentic. First of all, I know how a bow is supposed to be, how it's supposed to be designed, and how it really works, and how it's really lethal. And this is not anywhere in the realm of realistic. So there's that piece of it where you're not falling prey to that. Like your book is authentic in the way that someone that reads it that is an expert maybe in jiu-jitsu, or someone who is good at, let's say, knife fighting or whatever, they can sit there and go, yep, that authenticity matters.
Yeah.
And so that's one way that it's authentic. And then the other way, again, is that when you have a hero do amazing thing, that's great. But when they do things that you could duplicate 1 in a million times, it's like, okay, yeah, it's possible, but you just had that character do 7 things in a row that are a 1 in a million possibility. Yeah. And that's like a Bond movie where I love it to an extent, but it's like I prefer when it's a little further back in the realm of reality.
A little more gritty.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That to me is where the best of the best resides.
No, appreciate that. That's something that's very obviously comes naturally and comes across in these pages. But one of the worst things to do is watch a SEAL movie with a SEAL, a Special Forces movie with a Special Forces guy, law enforcement movie with a cop. So I try to enjoy movies and books when they make mistakes. I try not to let it ruin it, but sometimes it's hard. Like a scope on backwards in a movie, like that's difficult to look past, or the safety on the Glock getting clicked off before a shot in a book. It's like, oh, you had me up until then, and now I gotta get back into it. Don't let it ruin it. It was good up until now. Like those things. And so I tend to be very forgiving of authors and of movies to try to enjoy it and not ruin it for those around me that's sitting on the couch with me, like my wife, like, oh, that could never happen. Like, I don't want to ruin the thing for her and have her not want to watch movies with me. So I try to, I suspend disbelief, and that's it. That's an important part of fiction or TV or whatever else, because it's an escape.
You got to admit, man, when they nail it, it's so much more fulfilling.
If you put all the pieces together, and it's authentic and it's realistic and it's a great story and it has all the elements and you're rooting for the person, like all those things come together, then it's a special experience, whether it's a book or a movie. It doesn't matter.
Well, Jack, I'm real happy for you, dude.
Oh, thank you.
Happy for you.
Appreciate
This book, True Believer, people can get this book in a couple more days.
Yep, the 30th.
Everywhere the books are sold.
Yep, audio, ebook, hardback, and off to the races. And then third one, which will be a good one for anybody that's a bow hunter in particular, but a hunter in general. That I'm really excited to get that one out, and that'll be next year sometime. And then starting book 4 here in a couple weeks.
That's exciting. And then Terminal List, that's been out for year and a half.
Yep, March 6th of 2018 was its publication date. So a year and a few months. And then this was supposed to come out in April, but the government took 7 months to do 30-day review.
That's right.
So they're not big readers over there at the Department of Defense. But the first one, they got back to me in 45 days, and they took out about 10 sentences. Not bad, and they advertised 30. So I thought 15 days late was pretty good.
I could see all the blacked out parts in here.
So ridiculous.
Where you
so painful.
had to remove something that they put in there.
Yep, I just left it redacted, both in the first one and this one. But this one they took out, got back 7 months later, so it was supposed to come out April 2nd. Now it's coming out July 30th. because of that delay in the review process. And they took
crazy.
out about 57, 58 sentences this time, and then 2 full paragraphs. So a lot more than the first one. And it sounds like a lot, but when you have 130,000 words, it's not that much. But they took out some weird stuff, and we're going to appeal it this time. So my lawyers are going back, and they're finding every single one of these sentences they're attaching to a publicly available government document. So not just Wikipedia or New York Times or whatever, but a publicly available government document. And they found every single one except for one sentence. So we're appealing it this time, and then if we win on appeal, then we'll be able to publish the paperback without those redactions, so people can see what the government didn't want them to see. But
I love it. Dude.
They took out a country that I'd been to before I was even in the military, and it just made sense geographically for the protagonist to end up here for a little bit. And they took out every reference to that country to include the architecture, the mountains, but being the government, they forgot to take out the capital city.
That's
so I took that out for them, knowing their intent. I took that out for them.
Smart.
So so we'll see what happens.
That's crazy. Well, if you're a big audiobook fan, you can go and get Terminal List right away. It's awesome. So far, I'm hooked. Every review I've read is pretty much I can't put it down. So that's kind of how I feel right now.
People are liking it.
And this one I pre-purchased on Audible. When does it actually come out?
July 30th, Audible.
So the Audible will be available too.
Yep.
Oh, very cool.
All coming out at the same time.
All right. And then people can follow you on Instagram.
Yep. Jack Carr USA on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. But I'm not on Facebook. It just kind of reposts there from Instagram.
That's how I am.
But 3 platforms was going to be too much, especially for somebody that has no background in social media that just jumped right in to try to figure this animal out. But I am active on Instagram and Twitter, and I do get back to people that reach out.
And it's Carr, C-A-R-R.
C-A-R-R, Jack Carr USA. And then the website's officialjackcarr.com. And for people that want more of a deep dive into the weapons, the sniper weapon systems, M4s, knives that are used in the books and that I use downrange, they can go to the website and go a little deeper into
what was
that
the
sort
website
of thing.
again?
Officialjackcarr.com.
Sweet.
They can sign up for that. And then there's the newsletter on there where I typically do some sort of a little review of knives that I'm using or guns that I'm testing out, what I'm reading, whether it's magazines or books or whatever, and talk about that sort of thing on the newsletter for anybody that's interested in that as well.
I love it. Thanks,
Brand
man.
new,
I really appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. No, thanks for having me on. I've been a fan for a long time, so it's awesome to get down here and see you.
It's way overdue.
I know. And we live 45 minutes away from each other.
I know.
So we'll have to get out hunting at some point, too.
Sad.
We'll have to get you out to Lanai.
I know.
Come on out.
I've got, generously, you brought me some Axis deer. I've actually never eaten it.
I've heard it's the best.
Yep, that's why I brought you a good piece. So I brought you a good chunk of Axis, and then some ground meat as well, and then some salmon from the Queen Charlotte's.
Yes. So sweet.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for having me on.
Jack.
We'll get out and do some hunting soon.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right, folks. Thanks for tuning in to the podcast. Stay gritty.
Nice. Awesome, man.